Hello everyone, I am the storyteller and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. I never expected an old tailor shop to give me so many sleepless nights. I took that temporary job because I needed the extra cash, and I thought a simple administrative position in a historical building wouldn't be a big deal. I was wrong. Everything started on a cold Tuesday evening, and I still get chills when I remember what happened. Let me explain how I ended up getting freaked out by a bunch of dusty mannequins and one strange feeling that followed me home. I had been hired to organize paperwork for a small consulting firm that rented space in this old building downtown. The place used to be a famous tailor shop decades ago. People in the neighborhood talked about how it was once filled with busy workers, sewing machines, and mannequins lined up for fittings. Now, most of that history was gone or hidden behind modern renovations and a few leftover rooms that nobody seemed to use. The managers never bothered to change certain areas, and I got the sense they liked the old charm. The building had creaky floors, squeaky doors, and the smell of damp walls at night. On that Tuesday, my boss asked me to stay late. He said there was a stack of client files he needed sorted into a new system. I didn't see a problem with it. I wanted to show I could handle extra work. By the time I finished dinner in the small kitchenette and returned to my desk, the halls were empty. The cleaning crew usually left around 7. A few co-workers sometimes stayed until 8, but that night, everyone seemed to vanish before my shift ended. I remember sitting at my desk around 9 p.m. My hands were cold, and I kept rubbing them together to get some warmth. The heating in the building never seemed to work right. There was a single desk lamp on, plus the overhead fluorescents that flickered from time to time. It was quiet. The only sound was the hum of the ancient heating system and the occasional groan of the pipes. I started to feel a bit uneasy around 9:30 p.m. My eyes were tired, and I tried to focus on the final pages of the report. Then I heard footsteps in the hallway. At first I assumed it was just another co-worker or maybe a security guard, but the steps sounded slow, like someone walking carefully, almost dragging their feet. I put my pen down and listened. The footsteps stopped. I stood up from my chair and walked to the door of my office. The corridor lights were partially off, leaving long shadows on the floor. I leaned out and looked both ways. Nothing. Not a soul. I felt a slight pressure in my chest. My heartbeat picked up a notch. My first thought was that the old floors were just settling, but that explanation didn't match what I heard. It sounded like real footsteps on the old wooden boards. I decided to finish the report and get out of there as fast as I could. I sat back down and tried to ignore everything else. About 15 minutes later, I got up to use the restroom. When I stepped into the corridor, I heard a faint tapping sound coming from the opposite end. It was rhythmic, like someone gently knocking on a door. I hesitated, not sure if I should go check it out. My curiosity took over. I walked down the hallway, passing old framed photos of the building's early days. The tapping stopped again. I reached the end of the corridor and noticed a door was open. I recognized it as one of the unused rooms that used to be part of the tailor shop storage area. I was sure it had been locked earlier. Our boss had told us to keep all non-essential rooms locked, but now it stood open with the lights off. I swallowed hard and felt a knot in my stomach. I stepped inside using the flashlight on my phone to see around the dark room. The walls were filled with old shelves and dusty tools, scissors, measuring tapes, boxes of pins. There were also mannequins. They had no heads, just torso forms. Some were standing upright, others leaned against the walls. The air felt stagnant. A faint smell of mothballs and stale fabric lingered. I noticed right away that 3 of the mannequins were arranged in a row near the center of the room. They looked out of place, like someone had moved them recently. Their stands were crooked and one was tipped slightly to the side. I recalled passing by earlier that day when a coworker asked me for a box of old records. Those same mannequins had been in a corner, not in the middle of the room. That uneasy feeling in my chest got worse. My palms felt sweaty. I wiped them on my pant legs and forced myself to stay calm. I called out a quick, "Hello? Anyone here?" Nothing. No response, no movement, just the faint hum of the building's heating. I shined my light around one last time, then stepped back into the hallway, locking the door behind me. I twisted the knob a few times to make sure it was secure. Then I headed to the restroom feeling tense. I splashed some water on my face and took a moment to breathe. When I got back to my desk, it was almost 10 p.m. I powered through the remaining pages of the report. My hands were shaking a bit as I typed, and I kept glancing at the hallway. Finally, I was done. I saved the file and emailed it to my boss. I grabbed my jacket, turned off the lights, and walked out of the office. I tried to act normal, but my pace was faster than usual. The building felt too quiet, like it was holding its breath. As I approached the elevator, I heard that dragging step noise again. This time, it was behind me, maybe 10 or 15 feet away. I felt a shiver crawl up my back. I turned around quickly. No one was there. The corridor was empty. I didn't wait any longer. I got into the elevator, pressed the button, and held my breath until I reached the lobby. I signed out, nodded at the night guard, and left. The next morning, I arrived early to talk to my boss about what happened. He greeted me with a friendly grin. "How was the late shift?" he asked, sipping his coffee. I hesitated, then told him about the footsteps, the unlocked door, and the mannequins. He gave a little laugh, not in a mocking way, more like he found it amusing. "This building is full of surprises," he said. "It used to be a big deal for tailors around here. Maybe some leftover spooks." He was clearly joking around, but I didn't find it funny. He assured me there were no cameras in that particular storage room, so we couldn't check for intruders. He told me not to worry. Then he assigned me to the next project and changed the subject. For the rest of that day, I kept my head down, focusing on tasks. I tried to push the weird experience out of my mind. Around 5 p.m., I left and headed home. My place was a small apartment on the 3rd floor of a building a few blocks away. The walk back was uneventful. I grabbed takeout, ate in front of the TV, and tried to relax. That night, I went to bed around 11 p.m. I felt tired, but my mind wouldn't shut off right away. I replayed the events from the night before. Those footsteps, that door, the mannequins. Eventually, I drifted off. At some point, I woke up again, no idea what time it was. Everything seemed dark and quiet, but I felt this strange pressure on my chest. My breathing was shallow. I sensed someone was in the room with me. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I looked at my bedroom door. It was slightly open, leaving a narrow gap that let in a bit of light from the street lamp outside the window. I squinted, trying to see if someone was actually standing there. My eyes adjusted, and I noticed a shape. It was tall and narrow, like one of those torso mannequins. My body tensed up. I couldn't believe it. I almost convinced myself I was dreaming. I shifted in bed, sat up slowly, and stared at the gap. The shape didn't move. It looked like a mannequin was angled so it was peering through the door. My pulse was racing and I felt sweat trickle down my forehead. I considered turning on the lamp next to me, but I was afraid of what I might see if I lit up the room. I forced myself to speak in a shaky voice. "Who's there?" My throat felt tight. I heard no answer, no breathing, nothing. I reached out to the bedside table and switched on the lamp. The warm glow filled the room. There was no mannequin. The door was still slightly open, but I could see my hallway behind it, empty. My eyes darted around, checking every corner, but there was nothing out of the ordinary. My clothes were still on the chair, and my shoes were by the closet. I got out of bed and checked the hallway. All clear. I flipped on every light in my apartment, even the kitchen and bathroom lights. My reflection in the bathroom mirror looked pale, and my hair was messy with sweat. I grabbed a glass of water and stood in my living room for a few minutes, trying to slow my breathing. That sense of being watched lingered, like a ghost feeling in the back of my mind. I couldn't fall back asleep easily. I kept the lights on and dozed off on my couch around 4 a.m. I woke up 2 hours later to my alarm and felt groggy. My body was stiff, and I had a mild headache. I dragged myself to the shower and got ready for work. The entire time I kept checking behind the shower curtain, under the bed, in the closet, anywhere someone or something could hide. At work, I tried to focus on my usual tasks. I didn't say much to my boss or my coworkers. I just pushed through the day, feeling jumpy whenever I heard footsteps in the hallway. Every time someone walked by, I froze for a second, half expecting something bizarre. But everything seemed normal. By lunchtime, I was convinced I just had a bad dream. The mind can play tricks when you're tense. I told myself that repeatedly to stay sane. Still, I wasn't ready to stay late again. I made sure to finish my assignments before 5. At 4:45 p.m., my boss passed by my desk, asking if I could work overtime that evening. I felt a sudden wave of dread, but I didn't want to seem uncooperative. I tried to make an excuse about feeling under the weather. He just shrugged and said, "No worries, we'll handle it tomorrow." When I left the building that evening, I decided to walk an extra 10 minutes to clear my head. The city lights and the bustling streets around the center made me feel less anxious. I passed by a few shops and noticed one still had mannequins in the window display. I paused for a second. The mannequins reminded me of the ones in the old storage room. I felt a flutter in my stomach, so I turned away and kept walking. At home, I turned on all the lights again and double-checked my doors. I had dinner, watched some mindless TV show, and tried to distract myself. Eventually, I felt exhausted and decided to go to bed. I left my bedroom door open this time, with the hallway light on. I didn't want any shadows creeping in. For a couple of hours, I slept without interruptions. Around 2 a.m., I woke up feeling an odd chill. The air in my bedroom was cold, much colder than usual. I sat up and looked at the open door. Everything seemed normal. I got up, checked the thermostat. It was set to a comfortable temperature, but the vents were blowing cold air. I turned off the system and went back to bed. That strange sense of being watched came back. My muscles felt tense, like I was ready to jump up at the slightest noise. I rolled over, facing the door, eyes half open, just waiting. After several minutes, I started to relax. Then I saw a small shift in the hallway. Something moved. I bolted upright, heart pounding. I heard a scraping sound like someone dragging cloth across the floor. My mind went straight to those mannequins again. I pictured one of them standing in my hallway, shifting position. I had no choice. I got up and walked to the door. My stomach was in knots and my legs felt shaky. When I reached the hallway, I flicked on the overhead light. Nothing there. No mannequins, no intruder, just my quiet apartment. The only sound was the hum from the fridge. I felt a rush of relief, but also confusion. I knew something had made a noise. I wasn't hallucinating that sound. I stayed awake for hours, dozing off just before sunrise. That's how it went for the rest of that week. At work, I'd sense those footsteps in the corridor, or I'd notice a door open that I remembered locking. My boss kept shrugging it off, teasing me about ghostly tailors. My coworkers didn't share my experiences, so I tried to keep it to myself. At home, I'd catch glimpses of shapes in the shadows. Sometimes I'd hear soft scraping sounds, but every time I checked, there was nothing there. I can't say I ever proved what was happening. I have no pictures, no security footage, nothing but my own nervous memories. After that temporary job ended, I didn't stay in that building. I moved on to a new position somewhere else. I haven't seen a random mannequin in my apartment since. But I still remember the way those footsteps sounded at night and how sure I was that something stood at my door, watching me. I still get a tightness in my chest when I think about it, like I'm about to hear that dragging step in the hallway again. Now, whenever I pass by an old store with mannequins in the window, I feel that chill. It's like my body remembers before my mind does, sending a little jolt of fear up my spine. I guess I'm never going to look at a mannequin the same way again. And if you ever end up working in an old building with leftover mannequins, do yourself a favor, double-check the doors, and keep an eye on those silent figures. You might avoid some sleepless nights. I still remember the first time I heard about the thing that knocks on windows at night. My uncle brought it up at dinner, talking in a low voice like he didn't want the walls to hear. I sat there, chewing a piece of salted beef, not sure if he was trying to spook me, but he looked serious. He said there was something out there on the dirt roads. Some people called it a rag doll. Others just said it was a creature. It would run up to windows after sunset. Sometimes it tapped. Sometimes it scratched. People who saw it said it chased them if they were caught outside after dark. I thought it was another local story meant to scare city folks like me. I shrugged it off. I had traveled to this rural part of the Northeast to visit relatives I hadn't seen in years. My uncle and aunt owned some land. Their house sat near a cluster of other small homes, all with chipped walls, wooden shutters, and tin roofs. It was hot during the day, but the nights got cool and the wind made the trees whistle. They were always telling me legends and folk tales. I was used to hearing weird stories from them. I never believed any of it. But then my cousin came home one night, shaking so hard I thought he was having a seizure. He had scratches on his arms and tears streaming down his cheeks. He kept saying, "It was a doll. It was a doll." That was the moment I realized something else might be going on. He was a grown man, used to working in the fields, not the type to scare easy. I remember he sat down at the kitchen table and wouldn't stop staring at the door. Nobody else in the family said anything for a long time. Finally, my aunt poured him some water, and he took a sip, his hands still trembling. I leaned forward and asked him what happened. He wouldn't look at me. He just said he was walking back from a neighbor's house on one of those narrow dirt roads. He heard footsteps behind him, but when he turned around, he saw a small figure in the moonlight. Something that looked like a rag doll, standing on two legs like a person. He said it moved in a strange, jerky way, but it was fast. At first he thought someone was playing a joke. He even shouted, "Who's there?" But the figure charged at him. He tried to outrun it, and it chased him all the way back to the house. At some point it swiped at him with what felt like sharp nails or claws, leaving thin scratches on his arms. I didn't know what to make of it. Maybe some neighbor was messing with him. But the look on his face told me he believed it was something unnatural. My uncle demanded that from now on, no one should be on the roads after dark. My aunt started closing the windows as soon as dusk hit. I watched them move around the house, shutting the wooden shutters and bolting the doors before the sun fully set. It felt like a ghost town after 6 p.m. Everyone was too afraid to go out. I tried to shake off the fear. I told myself there had to be a logical explanation. Maybe it was a wild animal, or a person wearing a costume. But every night, I heard noises outside. Sometimes it was just the wind. Sometimes it was the branches scraping the roof. Other times I could have sworn I heard soft footsteps on the grass. I tried to sleep, but I kept my eyes on the window. I expected any minute to see a shape pressed against the glass. One evening, I was sitting on the porch, staring at the setting sun. The sky was orange and pink and everything looked calm. My aunt called out that it was time to lock up. I felt silly. I was a grown man, yet I felt a prickle on my skin when she said that. I closed the door behind me, bolted it, then went around checking the windows. When I got to my room, I looked outside. Nothing, just a darkening landscape and the shapes of trees in the distance. Still, I couldn't relax. I felt my heartbeat in my ears. At around midnight, I heard a thump on the window. I was lying in bed, half awake. I froze. My eyes were open, and my chest felt tight. Then I heard it again. 3 soft taps on the glass, like something was testing it. I held my breath, not sure if I should get up or stay still. My heart was pounding, and my skin was covered in cold sweat. Then I heard a slow scraping noise, like nails dragging down the side of the window. I thought about calling for my uncle, but I didn't want to draw attention. I stared at the window, hoping it would stop. After a minute or so, it went quiet. I got up and took a few steps toward the window. I kept my voice low and asked, "Is anyone out there?" No answer. I lifted the edge of the curtain just an inch and peered outside. Nothing. The yard was empty. The moon was behind a cloud and I couldn't see much except shadows. My pulse was still racing, but I managed to convince myself it was probably the wind or a branch hitting the glass. I tried to go back to sleep, but I spent the rest of the night listening for any sound. Every creak of the house made me jump. The next morning, I told my uncle about the noises. He looked at me with tired eyes. He said, "This is why we stay inside after sundown." Then he told me about other times people in the area had claimed to see strange things at night. Some said it was a lost spirit. Others thought it was a shape-shifting creature that took the form of a doll to lure people in. My uncle believed it was something that had been around for generations, and he didn't think it was going away anytime soon. He said the best we could do was respect whatever it was by staying indoors and out of trouble. I decided I wanted to see it for myself, though. I didn't say this out loud, but I felt a pull to find out the truth. I couldn't let my mind rest without proof. That afternoon, I started planning. I figured I could wait until nightfall, sneak out and walk along the dirt road to see if I could spot anything. It was a stupid idea, and I knew it. But curiosity ate at me. I waited until dinner was over. My uncle and aunt locked up early as usual. I stayed in my room, pretending to read. Around 10 p.m., I eased my window open. The shutters creaked, and I froze, worried someone would hear me. But the house stayed quiet. I climbed out, landing softly on the ground. The moon was bright enough for me to see where I was going. I moved slowly along the side of the house, then out toward the gate. Every step I took, the gravel and dirt shifted under my shoes, making crunching noises that seemed too loud. Once I was on the road, I felt a wave of fear roll over me. The night air was cool, and I felt goosebumps on my arms. The wind rustled in the trees, and somewhere off in the distance I heard the faint sound of a dog barking. I started walking, keeping my eyes on the ground ahead. The dirt road stretched out, lined by fields and patches of tall grass. Every few yards I thought I saw movement in the corner of my eye, but it always turned out to be a branch or a shadow. After about 10 minutes, I was far enough from the house that I could only see a faint glow from the lights inside. I started to think this had been a bad move. I kept glancing around, expecting something to jump out. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears again. My hands were sweaty, and my mouth was dry. I thought about turning back, but something kept me going. I wanted proof, or at least some kind of closure. I wanted to know if there was a real threat or just local superstition. I picked up my pace. The road curved ahead, and the trees got thicker on one side. As I walked around the bend, I caught a movement on my left. I snapped my head around and saw a small shape dart behind a tree. My stomach flipped. I froze, staring at the spot. I waited, breath shaky, counting the seconds in my head. Then I heard a soft rustling like something brushing against leaves. My mind was screaming at me to run, but my legs felt rooted in place. Then it appeared again, stepping out from behind the tree. It was shaped like a child-sized figure, but the proportions looked off. The limbs were thin and the head was tilted in a strange way. Under the moonlight, I saw what looked like rough, patchy fabric. I couldn't see a face, just a stitched pattern where a mouth might be. It was the rag doll. It stood there for a couple of seconds, almost swaying. I felt a cold wave of terror spread through my chest. My breath was shallow, and I could hear the blood pumping in my ears. The doll then took a step forward, and its movements were jerky, like a puppet on strings. My throat went dry. I wanted to run, but I also felt a terrible fascination. I took one step backward, not letting it out of my sight. It moved again, this time faster. It made a soft hissing sound, or maybe it was the wind. I wasn't sure, but I felt panic roar through my body. My muscles tensed, and I decided I had to get out of there. I turned and sprinted down the road, heart hammering. My breaths were loud and ragged. I looked back over my shoulder and I saw it lurching after me. Its legs and arms swung wildly, but it kept a speed that made my blood run cold. It was closing the distance faster than I thought possible for something that looked like fabric stuffed with straw. My lungs burned, and my feet pounded the dirt. Every step felt like it took too long. As I neared the lights of my uncle's house, I could feel the presence behind me. My arms were pumping and sweat stung my eyes. I risked another glance back. It was maybe 10 yards away. I could see its outline against the moonlit road. I let out a shaky breath and pushed myself harder. When I reached the gate, I flung it open and slammed it behind me. I stumbled across the yard, nearly falling. I heard a scraping sound on the gate, but I didn't look back. I pounded on the front door, shouting for someone to let me in. My uncle opened the door with a terrified expression. He pulled me inside and shut it quickly. My aunt was behind him, her eyes wide. She didn't have to ask me what happened. She saw it on my face. I stood there, bent over, hands on my knees, trying to catch my breath. My lungs ached, and my heart felt like it was about to burst from my chest. After a few seconds, my uncle locked the door with trembling fingers. Then we all stood in silence. Nobody spoke. We just listened for any sound outside. I thought I heard a faint scratching, but it might have been my imagination. My uncle told me to go to my room and stay there. I nodded. My throat was dry and I couldn't speak. As I walked down the hallway, I felt all the hairs on my arms and neck standing on end. I locked my bedroom door and sat on the bed, trying to calm down. My heart was still racing and my arms were shaking. I tried to reason with myself, telling myself it was just some trick or maybe I was seeing things. But I couldn't stop picturing that shape. Thin, ragged, moving faster than anything that should have been made of cloth. The next morning, I told everyone what happened. My aunt and uncle just looked at me. My cousin nodded slowly. He said, "That's what I saw." After that, I didn't try to leave the house at night again. None of us did. As soon as the sky started turning orange, my aunt would close the shutters and bolt the door. We ate dinner in near silence, and then we all went to bed. Nobody wanted to talk about it anymore. I heard the occasional knock or scrape on the windows, but I stayed in my room, too afraid to move. By the time I left that place a couple of weeks later, the only thing that stuck with me more than the sight of that rag doll was the feeling of terror that swept over me on the road that night. Even now, thinking about it makes my stomach twist. I don't know if that thing was some local legend or a real creature that stalks the roads after dark. All I know is that my cousin wasn't lying. After I saw it myself, I stopped laughing at those stories. And I never underestimated the quiet nights out in that region again. I sometimes think about going back, just to see if it's still there. But then I remember how it felt to run from that thing, my lungs burning and my mind screaming. I remember the sound of something tapping on the window when I tried to sleep. And I decide it's probably better that I stay away. My uncle and aunt still lock up every evening. From what I hear, most folks out there do the same. They know something is lurking in the dark, and whether it's a rag doll or something else, I don't want to meet it again. I walked into that bungalow on a rainy afternoon. I remember the musty smell in the living room and the way the floorboards creaked every time I shifted my weight. The realtor stood next to me with a half smile, probably trying to hide the fact that this place looked like it hadn't been cleaned or updated in decades. But the price was right. In fact, it was the cheapest option I could find in that small coastal town. I needed a place fast, and I didn't have a lot of money. I signed the paperwork on the spot and told myself I could fix it up later. That same evening, I dragged in a mattress, a few boxes of clothes, and a small table. I didn't have much else. I set up my mattress in the corner of the living room because I wanted to be near the fireplace. The nights can get cold by the ocean, and I thought the old fireplace might help. I had no idea that I'd soon regret choosing that spot. During my first night in the bungalow, the rain kept falling. I heard water trickling through the gutters, and the steady drip in one corner of the roof told me I had at least one leak to fix. The wind howled against the window frames and the glass rattled. It felt unsettling, but not scary. I was just tired from moving, so I curled up in my blanket and tried to sleep. The next morning, I woke up with a strange ache in my lower back. I wrote it off as the after effect of hauling boxes. Still, something about the ache bothered me. It felt sharp, like a knife twisting. I ignored it, got dressed, and decided to do a quick walkthrough of the house. The living room took up most of the front area, with the fireplace near the left wall. The kitchen was connected by a narrow doorway. The cabinets in there looked old and the sink was stained. Down a short hallway, there was a single bedroom and a cramped bathroom with tiles that were probably white 50 years ago. Everything needed a deep cleaning and maybe some repairs, but there were no immediate dangers. When I got back to the living room, I noticed a weird section of the floor near the fireplace. It looked like someone had cut out a rectangular piece of the wood and put it back in place without bothering to align it perfectly. I tapped it with my foot, and it sounded hollow. It was easy to spot because of a small gap at one corner. I knelt down, pried it up with my fingers, and lifted it off. Below, there was a space maybe a foot or two deep. My mind went straight to the idea of storage or maybe a hidden stash, but all I saw was packed dirt. Resting against the damp earth was a hunk of carved stone. It looked like a broken piece of a tombstone, maybe. I couldn't read any lettering. There were random shapes on the surface worn away by time. It was heavy, but I managed to pull it out a bit. I tried to see if there was anything else under there, but it was just dirt. At that point, I felt a chill, like an unexpected draft hitting the back of my neck. The house was old, so I figured there were cracks in the walls or foundation. I set the floor piece back in place. I told myself I'd deal with the stone later. Maybe I'd lift it out and try to see if it was valuable or if it had some historical significance. For the moment, I had more pressing stuff to handle, like cleaning and unpacking. But I couldn't stop thinking about how strange it was to find a big chunk of stone that looked like a grave marker in the house. It made me uneasy, but I brushed it off. I had to work on the plumbing and the roof leak before anything else. That night, I lit a small fire in the fireplace to dry out the living room a bit. The walls smelled damp and I wanted some warmth. As I sat there on my mattress, I noticed an odd sound. It was slow and quiet, like a steady sobbing. It wasn't loud. It was more like a distant moan that rose and fell in volume. At first I thought it was the wind, but the wind outside didn't match that pattern. This sobbing had a long, drawn-out quality, and it seemed to come from under the floor. I stood up, walked around, and tried to figure out the source. Each time I leaned closer to the fireplace, I swore the sound got clearer. My heart raced a bit, but I tried to stay calm. I told myself the wind might be traveling through the crawl space, creating an echo. I poked around, opened the floor hatch again. It was dark and smelled of wet soil. I couldn't see anything, and the sobbing sound seemed to vanish. My neck tingled, and I felt my pulse pound in my ears. After a few minutes of searching, I gave up and climbed back onto my mattress. I eventually fell asleep, but it wasn't a restful night. In the morning, I woke up in pain. My lower back felt tight and my upper back had a throbbing sensation. When I tried to stand, my back muscles seized. I let out a grunt and almost fell forward. This wasn't normal for me. I'd had minor aches, but nothing like this. I grabbed a painkiller from my bag, swallowed it dry, and waited for the pain to settle. I spent the day checking the roof leak, patching some shingles, and doing a few other repairs. I tried not to think about the weird sobbing, but my nerves were on edge. Every little creak in the house made me jump. The boards under my feet felt unsteady, and whenever I was near the fireplace, I kept glancing at the cutout in the floor. I found myself avoiding walking there if I could. Night fell, and I heard the sobbing again. It was a long, drawn-out crying sound, sometimes broken by what sounded like gasps. It was soft, but it never stopped for more than a few seconds. My stomach churned. My palms got sweaty. I had a feeling of dread in my chest. I turned on the TV to block it out, but I could still hear it faintly. Around midnight, I tried to sleep. My back still hurt, and every time I adjusted my position, I felt a stabbing sensation in my spine. The sobbing continued until I dozed off. On the third day, I woke up and felt a new kind of pain in my shoulders. Every muscle from my neck down to my lower back felt stiff. My spine popped when I moved. I could barely bend over to tie my shoes. I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror. My face looked pale. I saw sweat on my forehead, but the temperature in the house wasn't high. I also noticed the dark circles under my eyes. I swallowed more painkillers and decided to do something about the stone under the floor. Maybe it was messing with my head. Maybe it was a coincidence, but I couldn't ignore the timing. I went to the hardware store that afternoon and bought a stronger flashlight, a small trowel, and a few other supplies. When I got back, I moved the mattress aside, cleared the area near the fireplace, and pried up that section of floor again. The carved stone was there, leaning against the dirt. I aimed my flashlight at it, but I still couldn't make out any clear letters. The surface was worn and pitted. I dug around it. The dirt was compact and I didn't see anything else. After about an hour, my back was killing me, and I was sweating like I'd been running. My heart was racing too. I felt jumpy, like someone was watching me. I looked over my shoulder several times, but the living room was empty. I tried to lift the stone out, but it was too big and lodged at an angle. I only managed to shift it a little. A wave of nausea hit me. My arms trembled. I felt a sharp pang in my lower spine, and I had to let go. I leaned against the wall, panting. I decided to stop for the day. I put the floor panel back and went to take a shower. That night, the sobbing started earlier. I sat on the couch this time, away from the fireplace. I tried reading a magazine to distract myself, but every few minutes, I heard that drawn-out, mournful crying. It rose through the floor, vibrating through the old wooden boards. I turned on every light in the bungalow, hoping that would calm my nerves. It didn't help. My heart raced, and I felt tension in my neck and shoulders. My eyes kept drifting to the cutout in the floor. The section of wood seemed to shift in place, but maybe it was just my imagination. After a few hours, the crying faded. I stayed awake until sunrise, half expecting something else to happen. The next day, I started looking for a way out of this situation. I didn't want to admit I was scared, but I couldn't handle another night like that. The constant back pain and the unsettling atmosphere were too much. I called the realtor and asked if I could put the house back on the market. She said we could list it, but she warned me that it might sit unsold for a while. I said I didn't care, as long as I could get rid of it eventually. We put it up for sale that afternoon, but I got no calls or visits from potential buyers for days. I spent most of my time avoiding the bungalow. I'd wake up, gulp down painkillers, and leave to wander around town. I'd kill time at the diner or the pier. The weather was usually overcast, with a damp chill in the air. I found myself dreading the moment I'd have to go back. At night, the sobbing never failed to start up. Sometimes it began as soon as the sun went down, and it lasted until dawn. The pain in my back grew worse each day. My muscles felt like they were twisting and knotting up. I couldn't sleep more than an hour at a time. I started to get headaches, and I often felt nauseous after hearing that sound for too long. On the fifth night, I lost my temper. Around 2 a.m., I jumped off the couch, marched over to the cutout in the floor, and ripped it open. I shouted at the empty space. My voice cracked, and my face felt hot. I felt like I was yelling at someone, but there was nobody there. The sobbing didn't stop. My breathing got heavier, and a surge of pain shot through my spine. I collapsed to one knee and doubled over. My fingers dug into the edge of the floorboards. I could hardly see straight. The sobbing droned in my ears, echoing in my head. I let out a strained grunt and pushed myself upright. My vision blurred for a second, and I had to hold on to the fireplace to keep from falling over. That was the lowest moment. I felt helpless. The following morning, I decided I had to try something else. I tried contacting a local handyman to see if he could remove whatever was under the floor. When he showed up, he took one look at the stone, frowned, and said it wasn't in his skill set. He suggested calling someone from the local historical society, or maybe a contractor. I tried calling around, but no one wanted to deal with it once I described the shape and location. One woman told me it sounded cursed. She said she wouldn't set foot in my house. I hung up, feeling more uneasy. A week passed. The bungalow stayed on the market, but no one scheduled a viewing. I told the realtor I'd lower the price. I dropped it twice, but still no interest. The nights were pure agony at that point. The sobbing was constant and my back pain was so severe I had trouble dressing myself. My hands shook whenever I tried to lift anything heavier than a cup of water. I had no idea how to handle it. My bank account was running low, so I couldn't afford to leave and rent somewhere else. I was stuck. I tried sleeping in my car one night. I parked down the street and reclined the seat. But the tension in my back made it impossible to get comfortable. I dozed off for a couple of hours, then woke up drenched in sweat. My back felt like it was on fire, and I hobbled out of the car. The coastal air outside was cold, and it stung my lungs. I realized I needed my painkillers, which were inside the house. So I crept back in around 3 a.m. The sobbing was still there. It made my skin crawl. I hurried to the kitchen, grabbed the pills, and tried to block out the noise. But it was inescapable. It seemed to come from every corner. After that, I took a more desperate step. I called an old friend who lived a few towns away. I explained my situation, though I left out most details because I didn't want to sound insane. I asked if I could crash on his couch for a while. He said yes, but he wanted to know what was going on. I just said I was having problems with the house. I started packing a small suitcase that same day. My plan was to leave the bungalow for good, or at least until someone agreed to buy it. I didn't care if I lost money at that point. I just wanted to get away from the sobbing and the back pain. On my last night there, I stood in the living room, staring at the fireplace. I thought about the carved stone under the floor, the weird shape, the worn surface. I felt a wave of dread thinking about it. My back still throbbed, and I heard the familiar sound of crying. It filled the house, slow and haunting. My scalp prickled and my heart hammered in my chest. I clenched my fists and breathed in shallow bursts. I wanted to scream at it again, but I was too tired. Instead, I took a few steps back, closed my eyes, and tried to block it out. My head felt heavy and my shoulders were stiff. The sobbing rose in pitch, almost like it was mocking me. My eyes flew open. I hurried to my bedroom, grabbed my suitcase, and left without looking back. I didn't even bother turning off the lights. I never sold that bungalow. Nobody wanted it. I told the realtor to keep listing it, but months went by without a single bite. Eventually, I stopped checking in. I stayed at my friend's place for a while. My back started to feel a little better, though it took time for the sharp pains to die down. I haven't returned to that coastal town since then. I still get shivers when I think about that old bungalow and the cutout in the floor near the fireplace. I can't explain the sobbing or why it tortured me every night. All I know is that it's still there, somewhere under those rotting floorboards, behind that damp earth. And I'm done trying to make sense of it. I'm just glad I got out. I didn't expect to find myself in a quiet, remote place after so many months of frustration and unemployment. But when an old friend offered me a place to stay in exchange for looking after his property while he traveled, I agreed without thinking twice. It seemed like a decent deal at first. A roof over my head, some space to clear my thoughts, and a chance to save a bit of money. I figured it would be peaceful, maybe even relaxing. I was wrong. I drove out there on a Sunday afternoon, following my friend's directions. The place was about 40 minutes from the city center, down a bumpy road that felt like it went on forever. The grass on both sides of the driveway looked overgrown, almost waist-high near the fences. There was a small house on the property, a large barn next to it, and a bunch of old, rusted tools leaning against the barn wall. The air felt thick and still. There was no wind, and I didn't see any other houses nearby. I parked near the entrance of the barn and stepped out. The house itself looked worn down. The paint was peeling, and the windows looked a bit cloudy. My friend had said there was electricity and running water, but the pipes might make noise. I grabbed my bag from the trunk and went inside to check things out. The living room was small, with a couch, a coffee table, and a single lamp in the corner. A short hallway led to a cramped kitchen and a bedroom. The bathroom was next to the bedroom. Everything smelled like old wood and dust. I opened a few windows to let some air in. Once I set my stuff in the bedroom, I walked around outside to get a better sense of the property. The barn was bigger than I had expected, with tall wooden doors and a dark interior. It had a loft section for storing hay or whatever else might need to be stacked. Right now, it seemed empty except for a few scattered tools. A hammer, a couple of wrenches, and some nails on a wooden table. I also noticed a row of shovels hanging from hooks on the wall. I ran my hand over one of them and felt splinters. It seemed like no one had taken care of them in years. The first couple of days, I just tried to settle in. I kept an eye on the property, cleared a bit of the tall grass, and made simple meals. The area was quiet most of the time, with only the sound of crickets or the occasional truck passing on the distant road. But there was this weird feeling I couldn't shake. I felt like I was being watched whenever I walked near the barn. The first time it happened, I was hauling some tools back there. I stopped to wipe sweat off my forehead and glanced toward the open doorway. I could have sworn I saw something move in the darkness inside, but when I stepped closer, there was nothing there. It was just empty space. At night, I tried to relax on the couch watching TV with a weak signal. The channels barely came through, so I usually ended up turning it off and just scrolling through my phone. The silence around me felt heavy, and I noticed my own breath sounding louder than usual. It was uncomfortable, but I tried to brush it off. I told myself I was just not used to being alone in a place like this. After about a week, strange things started happening. I'd be half asleep and hear something clatter in the barn, like tools falling off a table. But when I checked the next morning, nothing was out of place. Everything was exactly where I remembered it. The first time I told myself I probably dreamed it. The second time I got out of bed at sunrise and walked straight to the barn in my pajamas. It was empty. The tools were on the table, no sign of anything falling. I started sleeping worse. I'd have these vivid nightmares about walking in the barn and finding somebody crouching in a corner, but I never saw a face. My heart would pound when I woke up, and I'd be covered in sweat. Then I'd notice the smell of damp earth in the house, like fresh soil after rain. But it hadn't rained at all. I checked the windows for leaks and walked around the outside walls. Everything seemed fine. I tried to distract myself by cleaning the house. I swept floors, dusted shelves, and rearranged furniture. None of it helped me feel better. Every time I went near the barn, I felt my neck tense up. My stomach would tighten. One afternoon, I decided to open the barn fully and spend a couple of hours in there, hoping to convince myself it was just an old building. I brought a chair inside and sat in the middle of the space, looking around. The walls had patches of peeling paint. The loft area up top was empty. I could see the outline of hay bales that must have been there in the past, but now there was nothing left. I heard my own breathing echo off the walls. I stayed there until the sun started going down. Nothing happened. But as I left, I still felt that odd sensation, like someone was just around the corner watching. That night, I woke up around 2 a.m. to use the bathroom. As I walked back to the bedroom, I saw a shadow move in the hallway. My body froze for a second, and I felt my heart thumping. I flicked on every light I could reach. I checked the living room, the kitchen, the back door. Everything was locked, and I was the only one there. I told myself I was still half asleep. My legs were shaking a bit, and I felt this sour taste in my mouth. I sat on the couch for a while, trying to calm down. My hands were cold, and my forehead was damp with sweat. Another night, I got up after a nightmare and smelled that same damp earth odor in the bedroom. It was stronger than before. I checked under the bed, in the closet, and around the windows. Nothing. I tried to open the window to air the place out, but I didn't feel any wind outside. The air was still. My heart raced every time I smelled that odor. It felt wrong, like it shouldn't be in the house. Around the third week, I started hearing creaks inside the walls at random times. I figured it might be old wood or something to do with the temperature changes, but these creaks sounded more like footsteps, like someone stepping carefully on the floorboards. I would stand up and follow the noise, but it always stopped before I got close. Then I'd hear it again near the barn or by the back door, but when I opened it, I saw only darkness. I tried shining a flashlight around, but it just lit up the tall grass and the side of the barn. I was running on very little sleep. My eyes stung from exhaustion and my shoulders felt sore from tension. I snapped at random things like the faucet making a loud screech or the front door squeaking. My mind raced all the time, jumping from one worry to the next. I started thinking someone might be messing with me, maybe a trespasser who knew my friend was gone. I walked around the house, checking for footprints or signs of forced entry. I didn't find anything that seemed off, except for a few patches of flattened grass near the barn entrance. One afternoon, I decided to call my friend. I told him something felt strange about the place. He just said he never had any issues except for the occasional raccoon or stray dog. He suggested I set up some traps or motion lights. That seemed like a good idea, so I went into town and bought a couple of motion sensor lights and an extra lock for the barn. I spent a few hours installing them. When night came, I watched from the window to see if anything triggered the lights. They stayed off until about midnight, when I was lying on the couch. Suddenly, the barn light switched on. I jumped to my feet and hurried outside carrying a flashlight. The sensor light lit up a circle in front of the barn, but there was nothing there. I walked around with the flashlight, peering behind the barn and along the side. I saw only tall grass and empty space. Then the light went off again. I felt the hair on my arms standing up. I stood there for a while, waiting to see if it would happen again, but it stayed dark. That same night, I struggled to fall asleep. At around 3 a.m., I woke up to a loud thud in the barn. It sounded like something heavy fell on the wooden floor. My chest tightened, and I felt a jolt of adrenaline. I grabbed my phone and a flashlight. I considered calling the police, but I hesitated, worried they wouldn't take me seriously. Instead, I walked outside, my breath shaky. I unlocked the barn door, stepped inside, and shone the flashlight around. The tools were on the table, the shovels on the wall. Nothing seemed out of place. The smell of old wood and dust hit me. My heart was pounding, and I felt sweat on my palms. I waited there, shining the light around every corner, checking the loft area by climbing the ladder. Empty. No signs of anything fallen. As I climbed down, my flashlight flickered, and in that split second I heard a shuffle behind me. I spun around, shining the light in every direction, but I saw no one. My stomach churned. I backed away toward the door, my breath sounding shallow. Once I got outside, I slammed the barn door shut and locked it with the new lock. I hurried back into the house, locked every door and window, and sat in the living room until sunrise. I kept the lights on. The next morning, I walked around the barn to see if there was a hidden entrance or a hole in the walls. I didn't see anything. The structure seemed intact, just old. I felt a gnawing anxiety that wouldn't go away. I tried turning on music to keep my mind off it, but every time I looked out the window, I thought I saw movement in the barn's shadows. A couple of times I rushed outside to check, but I never found anything. My nightmares got worse. I dreamed that I was inside the barn, surrounded by the smell of damp earth, while unseen figures circled me. I'd wake up gasping, my t-shirt soaked. Once I thought I saw a silhouette in the bedroom doorway, but when I sat up, it was gone. I could barely function during the day because I was so tired. My pulse seemed to race all the time, and I could feel my jaw clenching involuntarily. By the end of the month, I couldn't stand it anymore. I told myself I had to leave. I called my friend again, but he was still out of the country and asked if I could hang on a bit longer. I said I was having problems sleeping and that I couldn't figure out why weird things were happening. He laughed it off, blaming the isolation. I didn't bother arguing with him, but I made the decision to pack my bags and find somewhere else to stay. I'd text him my final decision if he didn't come back soon. Before leaving, I took one more walk through the barn in broad daylight. It was quiet, except for a drip of water somewhere in the back. I saw no leaks. The air felt cold, and I suddenly got goosebumps on my arms. I locked up the barn, shut all the windows in the house, and packed my suitcase. I carried everything to my car, double-checked that I had my phone charger and wallet, then got in the driver's seat. As I started the engine, I glanced at the barn doorway. I thought I saw a figure standing there, just for a second before it vanished. I felt a chill run down my back. My hands shook on the steering wheel. Without thinking twice, I backed up, turned around, and drove away. I didn't look in the rearview mirror until I hit the main road. When I finally looked, I only saw the dusty road behind me. The barn was out of sight. I don't know what was in there or why these things happened, but I wasn't going to stay there any longer. I never went back, and I haven't told my friend the full story yet. Maybe he'll return one day and say he never saw or heard anything. That's fine, I just know I'm not going back. I need to get this off my chest. This story has been stuck in my head for weeks. I still feel tense whenever I think about it. I'm not looking for sympathy or for someone to fix anything. I just want to lay out the facts. I want to explain exactly what happened, step by step, without adding extra layers of meaning. I'm going to describe everything as plainly as I can. That means I'll tell you how I felt, what I did, and how things looked and sounded. I won't try to interpret it in fancy ways. I'll just give it to you straight. I work in a mid-sized marketing firm. Our office is on the 5th floor of a glass building near the edge of town. We have cubicles, a small break room, and 4 meeting rooms. My department has about 12 people, including me. I like most of them. We have normal office banter, talk about sports, talk about weekend plans, sometimes talk about work frustrations. There's one guy named Richard who's pretty quiet. He keeps to himself most of the time, but he's polite enough when you speak to him. He's maybe in his mid-30s, around my age, and he's always wearing these brown slacks and a collared shirt. He never shows up in casual clothing, even on Fridays. About 3 weeks ago, we were both in a small meeting room. We were setting up for a morning presentation for a client. The room had a long wooden table and a big TV on the wall for screen sharing. I saw that he had a folder with some photos inside. They weren't related to the project. I could tell they were personal because I saw a picture of a big old house. I got curious. I asked him, "What's that place?" He didn't answer right away, but he gave me a very serious look. His eyes locked on mine, and I noticed his expression was stiff. Then he said, "It's something I keep around for a reason." I asked him if it was a family house or something like that. He paused. He said it wasn't a family house. He said it was a house known for weird stories. I laughed a bit. I thought he was messing with me or trying to pull my leg. He told me he had a framed version of that same photo on his office wall. I'd never noticed it before because I don't go to his office often. Richard said there were rumors that looking at the photograph for too long would bring bad luck. I thought it was just a joke, so I shrugged it off. But I have to admit I was a little intrigued. I asked if I could see the actual framed photo. He nodded slowly and said, "Sure, but look at it carefully. People say you have to pay attention to every detail." The way he said it made my stomach tighten a bit. I wasn't sure why I was getting uncomfortable. I remember clearing my throat and saying, "All right, show me." Later that afternoon, I went to Richard's office after lunch. His office is one of the smaller ones at the end of the hallway. It has a simple desk, a couple of chairs, and a window overlooking the parking lot. On the wall to the left of his desk, there was a framed black and white photo of a large house. It looked like a mansion with 2 floors, big windows, and a wraparound porch. The yard in front seemed overgrown with weeds. The edges of the photo looked worn, like it was old. The moment I stepped in, he gestured to it. He didn't smile. He didn't say anything else. I walked up to the wall and leaned in. The photograph had a strange clarity to it, even though it was obviously taken decades ago. The windows seemed dark, like they were tinted. The porch steps looked cracked. The door was slightly open. I stared at it for a while. I noticed a large tree beside the house that had branches hanging low, almost touching the ground. There was no person in the photo, no animals either. Just that house and the yard. When I looked at the door, I felt a small chill in my arms. It was just a house, but something about it made me uneasy. I shook off the feeling, turned to Richard, and tried to make a joke. I said something like, "I've seen creepier pictures in old horror movies." He didn't laugh. He just said, "Are you done?" I nodded. I left his office and went back to my desk. I tried not to think about it. but I did feel uneasy for the rest of the day. My stomach felt a bit knotted, and I found myself tapping my foot more than usual. I drank coffee to stay focused, but I was distracted by random thoughts about that house. I didn't even know where it was located. I decided not to ask him again because he seemed so serious. I told myself it was just an old photo and that he was trying to play some kind of weird mind game. That night I went home, ate dinner, and watched some TV. I live alone in a small apartment downtown. Everything was normal until I tried to sleep. I tossed and turned, and I couldn't stop picturing that doorway in the photo. I kept thinking about the slightly open door. My heart was beating a little faster than usual, and I felt this tightness in my chest. I thought maybe I had too much coffee. Eventually, I fell asleep. The next 2 weeks went by without any big events, at least at first. I went to work, attended meetings, tried to keep up with deadlines. I saw Richard in the hallway a few times. We said hi, but nothing more. Then, out of nowhere, things got weird. It was a Tuesday evening. I stayed late at the office to finish a project. I left around 8 p.m. The parking lot was mostly empty. I got into my car, started the engine, and began driving home. The roads were dark but not crowded. I remember signaling to turn left at a familiar intersection. Suddenly, my steering wheel jerked to the right. It felt like someone had yanked it out of my hands. The car swerved. I tried to correct it, but the steering felt locked for a moment. My heartbeat pounded in my ears. I pressed the brake hard. The car spun. I heard tires screech. My seatbelt dug into my shoulder. I slammed into a streetlight pole on the passenger side. The impact shook me. My head snapped forward. My arms started shaking. I sat there for a moment, breathing fast. When I finally got out, the front right side of my car was smashed. The streetlight was dented. Nobody else was on that stretch of road. A passerby pulled over to check on me. I called the police to report the accident. I didn't have an explanation. The officer asked if I had been speeding or if I fell asleep. I said no, I was alert. I told them it felt like the steering just locked up. The tow truck came, and I rode with it back to a repair shop. My hands wouldn't stop trembling. My body was tense. My neck felt stiff. Over the next few days, I spoke to the mechanic. He said he couldn't find a clear mechanical failure that would cause such a sudden lock. The power steering system was a bit worn, but not enough to cause a total loss of control like I described. I had to file an insurance claim. I borrowed my brother's car for a few days. I tried to shake off the weird feeling that something else was going on, but I couldn't. My mind kept drifting back to that photo. My brother's name is Mike. He's a healthy guy in his early 30s. He works out and doesn't have any chronic problems. Yet, right after I borrowed his car, he started feeling sick. At first, he said it was a bad headache and some chills. Then he got dizzy spells. He ended up going to urgent care when he couldn't stand upright for more than a few minutes without feeling like he would collapse. The doctors checked him out. They said it was some kind of inner ear infection or possibly a severe virus. They gave him medication, told him to rest, and advised him to follow up if it got worse. That same week, I found out that my car repairs were going to be more expensive than expected. I talked to Richard again, but I couldn't bring myself to mention the accident. I asked him how his week was. He shrugged and said everything was normal. I glanced at his office wall and saw the photograph again. It was still there, same spot, same frame. I felt a rush of nausea when I looked at it. My forehead broke out in sweat. My heart started pounding. I mumbled something about having a lot of work and hurried off. Mike's condition got worse by the weekend. He wasn't responding well to the medication. The doctors ran more tests. They said his blood pressure was fluctuating and he had trouble keeping food down. The doctors looked puzzled. They kept asking if he had traveled anywhere or if he had eaten something unusual. He hadn't done anything out of the ordinary. Seeing him so weak in the hospital bed made my stomach churn. I felt guilty using his car. I know it doesn't make logical sense, but I couldn't shake the thought that something connected to that photo was involved. My hands would shake when I thought about it. My head felt heavy. I had trouble sleeping. I kept feeling that door from the photo was opening wider in my mind, but I'm not going to go into any deep interpretation. I'm just saying I kept picturing it. I tried to force myself to ask Richard about the history of that house. Maybe I could piece together some kind of rational explanation, but each time I considered walking into his office, I'd feel lightheaded. I'd remember how his eyes looked when he told me to look at the details. Something about his posture and his tone back then made me feel like I was crossing a line. I started avoiding him. I skipped a few group lunches. I made excuses when he tried to talk to me in the break room. Meanwhile, Mike's condition hit a plateau. He wasn't getting worse, but he wasn't improving much. He stayed in the hospital for observation. My parents visited him, but they live a few states away, so they couldn't stay long. I visited every day after work. I'd see him lying there with an IV drip in his arm. He'd talk to me in a weak voice. No children or other family members were around, so it was just him and me during visiting hours. I tried to keep the conversation light, but my anxiety kept growing. My chest felt tight. My back muscles ached from the stress. About a week ago, I had a nightmare. I saw the front of that mansion. I was standing on the porch. The door was open. I could smell damp wood and old dust. I could see the hallway leading into darkness, but I won't get into dreamlike or symbolic details. All I'll say is that I woke up drenched in sweat with my heart pounding. I looked at my phone and saw it was 3 a.m. I felt a sharp pain in my stomach, like I was about to get sick. I ran to the bathroom and threw up. After that, I just sat on the bathroom floor, breathing hard, feeling my skin prickle with goosebumps. I didn't go back to sleep. The next day at work, I kept my head down. I focused on emails, spreadsheets, and phone calls. I felt a compulsion to get rid of any link to that photo. But I had no control over Richard's office. It wasn't my place. I tried to think of a logical reason to ask him to take it down, but it wasn't my decision. It was his personal space. I also wondered if it would even matter. I had already seen it. I had already looked at it closely. Maybe that was enough. I haven't told Richard about the accident or my brother's illness. I don't want to hear any theories from him. I'm not ready to deal with that. Part of me wants to confront him and say, "Where did you get that thing? Why do you keep it there? Do you know what's been happening?" But I can't bring myself to do it. Every time I pass his office, I feel my shoulders tighten. My chest gets heavy. I quicken my pace and look the other way. As for my car, it's still in the shop. The mechanic said it'll be at least another week, plus a hefty bill. I use a rental now. As for my brother, he's stable. He's been moved from the main ward to a smaller room for continued observation. The doctors say they're running out of tests to run. They can't figure out what's causing these symptoms. He's alert, but weak. I sit next to him and he tries to talk about sports or some show he watched, but he can barely manage more than a few words before he gets fatigued. I feel stuck. I can't prove anything. I have no evidence that the photo is tied to these events. I just have a heavy feeling in my gut. My mind keeps circling back to that moment when Richard told me, "Look at it carefully." He insisted, and I did. I can still see the cracks on the porch. I can still see the shape of the doorknob and the shadows in the windows. I keep asking myself why he was so adamant about it. Sometimes I think about removing it from his office wall myself, but that makes no sense. It's not my property. Plus, I'm afraid he'd catch me in there and I don't know what I'd say. I haven't told many people at work about the accident. I don't want to discuss it. I just gave a vague reason for why I'm driving a rental. People asked about my brother, so I said he's sick with an infection. Nobody seems suspicious. Richard hasn't pressed me about anything. He keeps acting normal, or at least his version of normal. He's still quiet, still wearing those brown slacks, still eating his lunch alone. I don't know what happens next. I'm trying to focus on getting my car fixed and helping my brother recover. I don't have the courage to look at that photograph again, and I have no intention of asking Richard where he got it. Sometimes I think about quitting this job just to avoid dealing with him, but I need the paycheck and I'm not sure that would solve anything. I worry this is already a done deal. I saw the photo, and if it is cursed, if that's the right word, then maybe I'm stuck with whatever that means. All I know is that I'm not sleeping well. I jump at small noises. My hands sweat when I drive. I check the steering wheel constantly, making sure it doesn't feel off. I glance over my shoulder when I walk alone at night. My brother is hanging in there, but I hate seeing him so weak. I feel responsible. That's where I'm at now. I'm waiting for a break in the storm, but it hasn't come yet. This is the only way I can tell the story. It's direct, it's raw, and it's the truth as I know it. There's no big conclusion. I'm just living day by day, wondering if that one moment of curiosity in Richard's office changed everything. I still remember the first night I tried to sleep in that house. My eyes were open, my jaw was clenched, and my breath felt tight in my chest. I lay there, staring at the dark ceiling, wondering if I had just made the biggest mistake of my life. I had taken this place because it was close to the factory where I worked. I thought it would help me save time, keep me away from the endless traffic, and give me a simpler routine. It didn't feel simple at all once I tried to close my eyes. It felt hostile, like the walls were waiting for me to let my guard down. I moved into this small ground floor house on a Monday. I didn't bring much. My belongings fit into 2 suitcases and a couple of cardboard boxes. The house was a single-story unit near the industrial zone, within walking distance of the main gate of the factory. The front door opened straight into the living room. To the right was a cramped kitchen with a small window, and to the left was a narrow hallway leading to the bedroom and a tiny bathroom. The walls were white, the floor was plain ceramic tile, and the windows had aluminum frames that looked a bit rusty in the corners. On the first morning, I felt relieved that I could leave for work at 7:45 a.m. instead of 6 a.m. I didn't have to rush. I got to the factory on foot in about 10 minutes. That part was great. I finished my shift at 6 p.m. and was back by 6:15 p.m. No traffic, no crowded buses, no wasted gas. It felt efficient. I cooked some pasta for dinner that night, turned on a small lamp in the living room, and settled into an old armchair I bought from a co-worker. My eyes were heavy, so I decided to go to bed early. As soon as I turned off the lights, I felt a slight pressure in my head. It started around my temples. It wasn't painful, but it was noticeable. By the third night, I was tired after a long day at work. I had stayed late to finish some paperwork, so I got home around 8 p.m. The air inside felt stale. When I opened the door, I noticed a musty odor. I walked around the house, opened all the windows, and tried to clear the smell. The kitchen window stuck a bit, and I had to yank it with both hands. It made a grinding noise before it slid open. Outside, there wasn't much of a breeze, so I stood by the open window for a while, hoping some fresh air would come in. My head started to ache again, a dull throb that spread behind my eyes. I took a shower, ate a sandwich, and tried to relax on the couch. There was a buzzing sound coming from somewhere near the kitchen sink. It sounded like a loose pipe or some faulty wiring behind the wall. It was a constant hum, and it made me restless. I got up and walked around the house, pressing my ear against the walls. I couldn't pinpoint the source. Eventually, I gave up and went to bed. That night, I heard odd noises in the walls, like wood expanding or old beams shifting. The house was mostly concrete with some drywall panels, so I wasn't sure what caused those creaks. They came at irregular intervals, sometimes loud, sometimes faint. Around 2 a.m., I jerked awake because of a sharp clicking sound near the corner of the bedroom. My eyes darted around in the dark. I felt sweat on my forehead, and my heart was beating faster than normal. I listened for a few minutes. Then I heard a low, whooshing noise. It sounded like wind rushing through a gap, but the air outside was completely still. The trees in the front yard didn't move, and the night was quiet. Yet something in the house made that soft, continuous whoosh, as if air was being forced through tiny cracks. After a few minutes, it stopped. In the morning, I woke up feeling stiff. My neck hurt, and I had a mild headache. I told myself it was just the stress from the new job and the change in my routine. I got dressed, made some instant coffee, and left for work. While walking, I wondered if maybe I needed to get a small fan or something to circulate the air in the house. My mind kept going back to that musty smell and that pressure in my head. I tried to push it aside, telling myself I would get used to it in time. A few days later, I stayed late at the factory again. I walked home in the dark, with just a few streetlights illuminating the sidewalk. When I reached my door, I noticed the porch light was flickering. I had left it off in the morning, so I was puzzled. I checked the switch inside. It was in the off position, but the light was flickering anyway. I tried flipping it on and off a few times. Eventually, it went dark. I shrugged and stepped inside. As soon as I closed the door, the house felt stuffy. I kicked off my boots, tossed my jacket on a chair, and moved to the kitchen. The overhead light flickered for a second before stabilizing. I opened the fridge, grabbed a soda, and then heard a loud crack from the living room. It sounded like the floor tile had just split, but I didn't see any damage. I walked slowly around, checking each tile, but everything looked fine. My hands felt clammy. My breathing was shallow. I kept telling myself it was just the house settling. That night, I had trouble sleeping again. My legs felt restless, and my head started pounding around midnight. I got up, drank some water, and returned to bed. I tried to block out all the little ticks and taps I heard in the hallway. I hoped it was just the water pipes or the electrical system. I tried to calm my breathing and clear my mind. Then I heard that whooshing again. It started near the bedroom window and traveled across the ceiling. It reminded me of air in a vent, but there was no vent in that room. I froze listening to it pass overhead. My scalp tingled. My heart thumped so hard I could hear my pulse in my ears. A few minutes later, everything went quiet. I exhaled and tried to relax. Then a sudden rush of air hit my face like a draft from an open window. The window was closed. I jumped up and flipped on the light. My bedroom looked normal. The window was latched, the closet door was shut, and the room was empty. But my skin felt cold. I could smell that stale odor again, mixed with something metallic. My stomach churned and my legs trembled a bit. I left the light on for the rest of the night. In the morning, I felt exhausted. I had circles under my eyes and my skin felt clammy as I got dressed for work. My routine at the factory was normal. I tried to focus on my tasks, but my mind kept drifting to the house. I told a coworker that the place felt humid and weird. He said maybe there was mold in the walls. I nodded, thinking that could explain the musty smell and my headaches. He suggested I check under the sink and around the bathroom for leaks. That afternoon, I came back and inspected every inch of the house. The bathroom looked fine, though the walls were a bit yellowed. Under the sink in the kitchen, there was some discoloration on the drywall, but it didn't look severe. I touched it. My fingers came away dry. I opened the windows to air everything out, but no breeze came in. After a couple of hours, I closed the windows, took a shower, and tried to enjoy a simple meal. I put on some music, hoping to distract myself from the tense atmosphere. The music helped for a while, but every time there was a pause between songs, I heard little ticks and clicks from the walls, like something was expanding or contracting in random bursts. Around 10 p.m., I turned off the music and decided to get some sleep. My bedroom felt hot. I kept the door open to let air circulate. The hallway light was on, casting a faint glow inside the room. I lay down and tried to breathe slowly. My eyelids grew heavy. Just as I was drifting off, I heard a distinct scraping sound from the kitchen. It sounded like a chair being dragged across the floor. My eyes shot open, and my stomach clenched. I sat up and listened. Nothing. I forced myself to get up and check. The chairs were in the same position as before. The room was silent. I stayed there for a full minute, scanning every corner. I felt my pulse racing again and a tightness spread across my chest. Back in the bedroom, I crawled under the sheets and left the hallway light on. My arms felt tense, and my shoulders were stiff. I noticed my own breath was shallow and fast. After a few minutes, I managed to fall asleep, but I woke up around 3 a.m. to the same howling sound I'd heard before. It was louder this time, like wind whipping through the living room. My heart pounded as I swung my feet onto the floor. I moved toward the hallway, trying to stay quiet. The living room was dark because I had turned off the lamp. As I stepped inside, I felt a rush of cold air against my face. It startled me enough that I almost lost my balance. My legs felt weak, and I caught myself against the wall. The switch was right there, so I flipped on the light. The room appeared empty. The windows were shut. The door was locked. My breath came in short gasps. My neck tingled, and sweat trickled down my back. I grabbed a flashlight from a drawer and walked around the exterior of the house. The sky was clear, with a few stars visible through the factory lights in the distance. There was no wind. The trees were still. The yard was empty. I circled back to the front porch. The porch light stayed off this time. I went back inside, locked everything, and sat on the couch for a while with the flashlight in my lap. I felt my hands shake. My thoughts were scattered, but one thing was clear. I felt like I didn't belong there. That house felt suffocating, like every time I inhaled, something in the air pushed back. Over the next few days, my headaches got worse, especially on nights when I came home late. I tried leaving the windows open during the day, but it didn't help. Sometimes I heard faint rattling in the walls. Other times I felt a sudden chill in the hallway. I started to dread coming home. After work, I found myself lingering outside, either in my car or near the parking lot, just to avoid stepping into that place. When I finally came in, I felt my muscles tighten, and I wanted to leave again. One evening, a coworker offered to give me a ride to a nearby hardware store. I bought a dehumidifier, some caulk, and weather strips. We got back, and he helped me seal a few cracks around the windows. We plugged in the dehumidifier in the bedroom. It made a loud hum, but it seemed to help a bit with the odor. My coworker didn't mention feeling anything strange, but he didn't stay long. He left after about half an hour, and I locked the door behind him. That night was quiet for the first couple of hours, but around 2 a.m., the dehumidifier shut off. I thought maybe the power tripped, but the bedroom light was still on. I got up, pressed the power button on the machine, and it roared back to life. Then, out of nowhere, I heard a strong gust of air rush along the hallway. My bedroom door slammed shut, making me jump back. My ears rang from the sudden noise. My heart felt like it was about to burst from my chest. I yanked the door open again, and the hallway was dark. I flipped the light switch. Nothing. The bulb was out. I stood there breathing hard, with sweat running down my temples. I tried to calm myself by counting my breaths. I opened the breaker box and saw everything was still on. I returned to bed, but I couldn't sleep. The next morning, my head throbbed so badly that I called in sick to work. I spent the day in bed trying to rest, but the air felt thick and sour. Every so often, I heard pops in the ceiling or random scraping sounds. My gut was in knots, and I felt shaky. That was when I decided I had to get out. I couldn't focus at work, and I was losing sleep. I contacted the landlord and said I wanted to break the lease. He sounded annoyed, but I didn't care. I told him the house felt damp and I couldn't handle the constant noises. He came by one afternoon to inspect it. He didn't stay long, just glanced around, said everything looked normal, and left. He said if I wanted to leave, I'd have to pay a penalty or find someone to take over the lease. I nodded and told him I'd figure something out. By the following week, I was barely able to function. My headaches were constant, my eyes burned, my nerves felt raw. At night, I still heard the wind-like noise inside the house, even when the weather was still. I stopped trying to explain it. I just packed my things in a rush. I spent 2 days looking for another place to rent. I ended up finding a small apartment closer to downtown, a bit farther from the factory, but at that point, I didn't care about the commute. On my last night in that ground floor house, I couldn't sleep at all. The air felt heavy and the headache was intense. I heard all the usual sounds: cracks in the walls, faint scratching near the baseboards, and that constant whoosh of air that seemed to move through every room. I sat on the couch with my arms crossed, my back rigid, and watched the windows. The house was silent for a moment. Then I heard a loud creak above me. It echoed across the ceiling. I looked up but saw nothing. At sunrise, I carried my suitcases to the car. I didn't even bother to eat. I just wanted to leave that place behind. My hands shook as I locked the door for the last time. I felt like I could breathe again as soon as I stepped outside. I didn't say goodbye to the neighbors, I just got in my car and drove off. Even now, when I think about that house, I feel my chest tighten. I remember the stale air, the headaches, the flickering lights, and those strange gusts that appeared out of nowhere. I don't know what caused it, and I'm not sure I want to know. All I know is that living there for those few weeks felt like being under constant pressure. It never felt like home. It felt like the house wanted me gone, and I'm glad I left before it did anything worse. I took a job as a night watchman at a rundown municipal hospital. I wanted extra cash, and the supervisor said they needed someone to patrol the basement from 10 at night until 6 in the morning. I didn't think much of it at first. The hospital felt old, but I've worked security before and figured it would be quiet. I was wrong about the quiet part. I'll describe the basement. It's a long hallway with chipped floor tiles and walls with peeling paint. The ceiling has old fluorescent lights that buzz when they flicker. There's a single elevator at the far end. It connects the basement to the ground floor and the other levels. I spend most of my shift in a small office next to the elevator. There's a window in that office that looks out onto a part of the hallway. I can see about half the corridor if I stand up and lean forward. The rest is hidden behind a corner, including the storage rooms and the boiler area. My first night was calm. I walked the hallway every hour, checked the locked doors, and sat in the office for the rest of the time. Around midnight, the elevator suddenly arrived on the basement level. I heard the clank of the doors. Then I saw the metal panels slide open. No one stepped out. It was just there, doors open, waiting. I stood at the office door and watched for a few seconds. Nothing happened, so I walked over, looked inside the elevator. It was empty. The panel inside showed that it had come from the ground floor, but I hadn't called it. It stayed there for maybe 20 seconds, then closed the doors and went back up. I shrugged it off. I thought maybe someone on another floor pressed the call button, then canceled or something like that. The second night it happened again. This time it was around 2 a.m. Same thing. Doors slid open, nobody inside. I glanced at the elevator's digital display. It read 1, which is the ground floor in this building. I checked my phone to see if maybe I was mixing up the time. It was exactly 2 hours. I thought that was strange, but I tried not to overthink it. I looked around the corridor, expecting to see a late shift nurse or maybe a staff member from upstairs, but nobody was there. That night, it happened 4 times. Each time the elevator arrived at a very round hour, 11, 2, 3, and 5 hours. Each time the doors opened for about 20 seconds, then closed. I walked inside once and pressed the ground floor button to see if maybe I could catch whoever was messing with the controls. The elevator took me up. When I arrived at the ground floor, there was nobody near the call button. The hallway on that level was empty and the lights were dim. I didn't see any sign of a malfunction. I went back down and tried to ignore it. After my shift ended that morning, I asked one of the day shift clerks about the elevator. He was an older guy who'd been there for over a decade. All he said was, "It happens sometimes." He spoke in a bored tone, like he didn't care. I asked if there was a reason or if it was an old wiring issue, but he just repeated himself. "It happens sometimes." Then he told me to talk to maintenance if I was bothered by it. I didn't push it. On the third night, I arrived around 9:50 p.m. The security office upstairs was empty, but they leave the basement key on a hook. I grabbed it and took the stairs down. As soon as I stepped into the basement, I smelled a damp odor. The place always has that musty smell, but this time it felt stronger. I went to my office, turned on the lights, and checked the camera feeds. The monitors in there are old, with some static lines, but they cover most of the corridor. One camera is pointed right at the elevator doors. I kept looking at that camera feed because I was anxious about the weird elevator pattern. Nothing happened until 11 p.m. Right on the dot, the elevator arrived again, and I watched it on the monitor. Doors opened wide. I could see the empty interior. I left the office and walked over. The temperature near the elevator felt colder than in my office. I felt goosebumps on my arms. I looked at the panel inside. It read B for basement, of course, but no button had been pressed. I waited a few seconds, then the door slid shut and the elevator went up. It happened again at 1, 3, and 5. Each time the elevator arrived at an exact hour. Each time no one was inside. I was starting to feel a constant tension in my gut. I spent most of the shift pacing up and down the hallway listening for anything. The basement is mostly silent at night, but I could hear water dripping from a rusty pipe near the laundry room. Sometimes the fluorescent lights flickered, and each time it happened, my heart jumped. Around 3:30, I was leaning against the wall near the elevator, just waiting to see if it would open again at some random time. A loud click came from somewhere in the ductwork. I froze for a moment, listening to my own breathing. It was fast and shallow. The tension wasn't going away. When my shift ended, I went upstairs and found a different staff member who had been at the hospital for a long time. This guy was a janitor with gray hair and a limp. I asked if he knew about the elevator's habit of coming down by itself. He nodded but didn't offer any details. I asked if it could be a wiring glitch. He said he didn't think so. I asked if someone from the hospital had died inside the elevator or something like that. He shook his head and said, "No. People just don't mess with it. It's easier not to." Then he walked away, dragging his cart behind him. I felt uneasy. There were no answers, just vague statements. On the fourth night, I got a cheap portable chair to keep me comfortable in the hallway near the elevator. I decided I wanted to watch it in person, not on the monitor. I set up my chair a few feet from the doors. I had a thermos of coffee in my hand. Every time the elevator arrived, I stood up and checked inside. It stayed empty. I tried pressing random buttons or calling different floors to see if anything changed. Nothing changed. It always closed after about 20 seconds, then left. My mind started to imagine possible reasons. Maybe the control board was faulty. Maybe there was some weird short-circuit time to the hours. Maybe an old program was messing with the elevator's schedule. Those were the thoughts running through my head. I felt a knot in my stomach, though, like there was more to it than a simple glitch. By the fifth night, the pattern stayed the same. It started right before midnight and continued every hour or two. No calls on the radio, no visitors, no staff walking around. Just the elevator. I felt my hands tremble a little when it happened at 2 a.m. I remember swallowing hard and stepping inside the elevator. The air in there felt stale. I pressed the ground floor button and went up. I wanted to catch someone in the act. As soon as I reached the ground floor, the doors opened to a dimly lit corridor. The security desk was at the far end, but I saw no one there. I called out, "Hello?" My voice echoed. I walked to the desk. It was empty. I looked around for a minute, then gave up. I pressed the button and went back down. Same routine. I stood in the basement, feeling a tightness in my chest, trying to calm down by taking deep breaths. That morning, around 6:05, I locked up and went home. I couldn't shake the unease. I felt jumpy all day, even when I was supposed to be sleeping. I'd close my eyes and see the elevator doors sliding open in my head. That same clank, that same pause. Then the doors closing. It was looping in my mind. On the sixth night, I decided to talk to the maintenance guys directly. I found one at around midnight. He was in the boiler room area, carrying tools. He seemed annoyed when I asked about the elevator. He said he'd checked the system a few times and never found a fault. I asked if the controls were old. He said yes, but they'd replaced certain parts a couple of years ago. He didn't see any reason for random stops in the basement. Then he pointed at a dusty old circuit box on the wall. He said that if the elevator was receiving power surges, the lights in the corridor would flicker at the same time. But they didn't. So he shrugged, said, "I can't help," and left. After that, the tension turned into frustration. I was sick of feeling on edge. I kept hearing the elevator doors at odd times. Always that mechanical hum and the doors sliding. I started marking each time on a notepad. Over one shift, I recorded 11:0, 10, 20, 30, 50, and 5:30. The half-hour one threw me off. It wasn't always exact, but it was close. I kept track of the times in case I decided to show it to someone. But every time I tried talking to the day staff or someone in charge, they acted casual. They seemed used to it. After a week of this, I noticed I was sweating more and feeling tense whenever the elevator started moving. My hands would get clammy. My heart rate would spike. I kept expecting something or someone to step out. Each time, the corridor stayed empty. I started turning on every light in the basement, even the ones in the far corners near the storage rooms. I didn't want any shadows. I wanted full visibility. It didn't help me relax, but it made me feel less cornered. Sometimes I heard faint footsteps above me, but that was normal for a hospital. Occasionally I heard carts rolling overhead or a heavy door slamming somewhere in the distance. That's just part of working night security in a hospital. But the elevator was different. I felt it pulling at my attention every time it arrived. I'd stand up, my knees stiff, and stare at it. The doors would open. I'd hold my breath. Nothing. Then it would close. I'd exhale and sit down. The strangest part was that over time, I started to anticipate the exact minute it would show up. Around 2 a.m., my heart would start racing a few seconds before I heard the whirring of the elevator machinery. It was like my body learned the pattern. I'd look at my phone, and when the clock changed to 2, I'd hear the elevator approach. It felt like being in a loop I couldn't escape. By 4 a.m., I'd feel exhausted but too wired to nap. I'd walk laps around the basement just to stay awake, checking each locked door, trying to distract myself. One night I tried ignoring the elevator completely. I stayed in the office with the lights off, the camera monitor on. When the elevator came down at midnight, I didn't move. I forced myself to stay in my chair. I watched on the monitor. Doors opened. After about 20 seconds, they shut again. Then the elevator went back up. I felt my forehead sweating, and I kept wiping it with my sleeve. I thought if I avoided checking it, maybe I'd feel better. But I just felt more uneasy, like I was letting something happen without supervising it. So I went back to watching it in person. At least then I knew nobody was stepping out. One night I got the idea to try riding the elevator at each arrival. I wanted to see if maybe it would stop at a random floor. So at 1 a.m. I waited for it to arrive, jumped in as soon as the doors opened, and stood inside without pressing any button. The doors stayed open for the usual time, then slid shut. The elevator moved up. I watched the numbers on the panel. 1, 2, 3. It went up to the 3rd floor. The doors opened. I looked out. The corridor was empty. The lights were on. Then, without me pressing anything, the doors closed, and the elevator went back down to the basement. It opened again. I stepped out and it left. Nobody else got in. I repeated that at 2 a.m., 3 a.m., and 4 a.m. Sometimes it stopped at the 2nd floor, sometimes the 3rd, once at the 4th, but I never saw anyone. It felt pointless, but I needed to test it. The 7th or 8th night, I asked the older employees again. One nurse told me, "That elevator does what it wants at night. We don't worry about it." She said it in a flat tone, like it was an ordinary fact. When I pressed her for more details, she shrugged and said she'd rather not talk about it. She walked away with a disinterested expression. Nobody seemed to care that this was happening every night. I wanted to quit at that point. The job paid okay, but it wasn't worth the stress I felt. I started to dread walking down those basement stairs. I started leaving my house later and later, dragging my feet, hoping I'd get there right at 10 p.m. and leave at 6 a.m. on the dot. But I decided to last a few more nights to see if it changed or if I could gather enough evidence to show maintenance or some higher up. Each night was the same. The elevator arrived at random times, always close to the top of the hour. Sometimes it showed up at 1:30, which threw me off. Sometimes it skipped a usual time, which made me uneasy too. I'd sit there waiting, and it wouldn't come. Then, out of nowhere, at some weird time like 4:17, the doors would slide open. My pulse would jump. I'd step over and see it empty, just like always. Then it would close. That's how my nights went. I've worked the job for several weeks now. I still don't have an explanation. The hospital staff won't say much. The maintenance team claims there's no malfunction. My supervisor doesn't think it's a big deal. He says as long as I'm patrolling and keeping the basement secure, everything's fine. I'm tired most of the time. I spend my days trying to sleep, but I keep thinking about that elevator. I hear the mechanical hum in my dreams sometimes. Tonight is another shift. I'm heading there soon. I know I'll sit in that old basement office. I'll hear the buzzing lights, the dripping water, and then, at some point, I'll hear the elevator machinery clank. I'll step out and see those doors open again, just sitting there. No one will step out. I'll look inside. It'll be empty. Then the doors will close and it'll leave like it always does. That's been my routine. It's not normal, but nobody here cares. They say it happens sometimes, and that's it. That's my reality now. I just deal with it night after night. I never expected to see human-looking bones in my own backyard. I just wanted cheap land near a small stream, far from traffic and noise. But that day changed everything. I remember the moment I found them like it happened 5 minutes ago. There was this damp soil, some loose rocks, and then those fragments of bone that didn't look like they belonged to an animal. Next to them, I saw a tarnished silver medallion with faded initials. That discovery turned my simple construction project into something tense and unsettling. I bought the land because it was a bargain. It was a stretch of uneven ground, full of tall weeds and random piles of stones. The realtor told me nobody wanted it. It was too isolated and close to a creek that sometimes overflowed during heavy rain. I didn't mind. I liked the quiet. On the first day, I walked around and tried to picture where I'd put the foundation. There was a mild breeze and the sound of running water nearby. The tall grass brushed my legs. I felt relaxed and eager to start. My plan was simple: clear the land, remove the rocks, then lay down some basic support beams. I started cleaning up right away. I brought a machete and a small shovel. The brush was thick, so I hacked away for hours, sweating and swatting insects. The grass was chest high in some spots. Underneath, there was damp soil that smelled like rotting leaves. Once the sun got too hot, I decided to take a break. I set my tools near a makeshift woodpile by the edge of the property. Then I sat down on a flat stone and sipped water from a bottle. I listened to the creek. It had a gentle sound like a slow trickle over rocks. I felt good about my progress and went home that afternoon. The next morning I returned with more tools: a pickaxe, a wheelbarrow, and a rake. I noticed something right away. The machete wasn't where I left it. Instead of being on the woodpile, it was lying about 20 feet away on the ground, covered in dirt. I assumed I must have dropped it, although I was pretty sure I'd set it aside neatly. That was odd, but I shrugged and got to work. Over the next few days, I cleared more brush and started digging up loose rocks. I stacked them in a corner. I wanted to use them later for some sort of boundary wall. I didn't think much of anything unusual until the day I found the bones. I was digging near an old stump, prying it out with the pickaxe. The soil there was dark and had layers of silt. As I pulled chunks of dirt, my shovel hit something hard that wasn't a rock. When I knelt down, I saw a piece of bone about the size of my palm. It had a shape that looked like part of a human forearm. I froze. I scratched more dirt around it, found smaller fragments, and then something metallic next to them. It was a silver medallion, round with some letters that I couldn't quite read. The initials might have been MS or NS. It was too worn to tell. I lifted the bones carefully. They felt dry and brittle. My heart pounded. I had no idea what to do. I placed them on a flat rock and inspected them. They looked human, but they were small. I wasn't sure if they were from an adult or maybe just a small-framed person. There were no signs of anything else, no coffin, no big pile of remains, just these fragments and the medallion. I felt a chill crawl up my arms. The air around me seemed heavier. The sound of the creek faded in my ears. I decided to put the bones in a plastic bag along with the medallion. I told myself I'd figure out what to do later. Part of me wondered if I should call the police, but I wasn't certain they were definitely human. I thought, Maybe I'll check with a friend who knows a bit about anatomy, or maybe I'd just call the police anyway to be safe. But I postponed it. I wanted to finish my day's work, and I tried not to think about it too much. That night, I had trouble sleeping. My mind kept flashing back to those bones and that silver medallion. I tossed and turned, thinking about who might have buried them, or if there was some old story about this land that the realtor never mentioned. The next day, I arrived at the site early. I wanted to push forward with the clearing. I took out my wheelbarrow, set out my shovel and pickaxe, and planned to dig near the same stump. After about 3 hours, I stopped to eat lunch. I placed my tools next to a boulder so they wouldn't roll downhill. I walked off to my truck to grab a sandwich. When I came back, all my tools were gone. I swore under my breath. My first thought was theft, but there was nobody around. Then I spotted the shovel about 30 feet away, almost on the other side of a bush. The pickaxe was leaning against a tree trunk even farther off. The wheelbarrow was turned upside down near the creek. I felt a burst of anger and confusion. I didn't see any footprints. The ground was soft, but I only saw my own footprints leading away to the truck. I kept spinning around in circles, searching for any sign of someone messing with me. The brush was mostly cleared, so I should have seen a person if they were around. That made my skin crawl. It felt like the air temperature dropped a few degrees. My breathing got shallow, and I felt sweat trickling down my back. I picked up my tools and put them all back in one spot. I looked around again and shouted, "Hello?" No answer. The stream kept making its soft, gurgling noise. The rustle of leaves sounded louder than usual. I felt exposed, like someone was watching me. I packed up my stuff for the day and left. On the drive back, my hands trembled on the steering wheel. I kept checking the rearview mirror, even though I was alone in the truck. That night, I decided to place the bones and the medallion in a box in my garage. I locked it. I told myself I'd call the police soon. I needed more time to think. The next morning, I went back to the site. I wanted to see if anything else had been disturbed overnight. As soon as I parked, I felt uneasy. I walked around carefully. The place was silent. The wind was calm, and I didn't hear many birds. I went to the area where I'd left a few bags of cement mix under a tarp. The tarp was gone. The bags were scattered in a line, each ripped open. The powder had spilled in clumps all over the ground. It looked like someone had dragged them around. But there were no footprints, no tire marks. That part freaked me out. I stood there, my heartbeat thudding in my ears. I was starting to think I wasn't dealing with a normal intruder. I spent the next few hours rebagging the spilled cement mix and trying to salvage what I could. I felt paranoid, constantly turning my head to check behind me. My shoulders were tense and my mouth was dry. It was hard to focus. I considered calling a friend to come over, but nobody was immediately available. I didn't want to sound crazy either. I kept thinking maybe there was a trickster or squatter, but that made no sense. The place was wide open, with no good hiding spots left, and I hadn't found any footprints. Around noon, I heard a sudden splash in the creek. It startled me, so I dropped my shovel. I hurried to the bank and saw ripples in the water, but no sign of an animal or a person. I stood there scanning the other side. Nothing. Just rocks and water. I felt a light breeze against my face, but I was sweating. My gut told me not to keep digging. By late afternoon, I forced myself to push through. I lugged some rocks around, trying to think about something else. I managed to clear a decent section for the foundation. When I was done, I placed all my tools in the bed of my truck instead of leaving them on the ground. I wasn't about to give anything a chance to throw them around again. My mind kept cycling through possibilities. Maybe a neighbor was playing a prank, or maybe someone local wanted me off the land. But I didn't see any neighbors for miles. The closest house was a good 10-minute drive away. That evening, I told a buddy of mine about the scattered tools and the spilled cement. He joked that maybe my land was haunted. I didn't laugh. He saw my expression and then offered to come by the next day. I was relieved to have someone else with me. At sunrise, we drove out in his truck. When we arrived, nothing looked out of place. I felt a hint of hope. Maybe it was over. We spent the morning hauling more brush and flattening an area for the house. Eventually, I needed to refill our water bottles, so I walked back to the truck. My friend stayed behind. When I got back, my friend looked pale. He said he had put his gloves down on a stump for a few seconds, and when he turned around, they were gone. We searched the entire area and never found them. We combed through the grass and around the rocks. They were just gone. After that, he made an excuse that he had to leave. I saw the fear in his eyes, and I felt the same tension in my stomach. I stayed a couple more hours alone, but I was jumpy. Every little sound made me spin around. I left before sunset. I felt too uneasy to remain there after dark. The next few days followed a pattern. I'd show up, find some item moved, or discover new damage. Sometimes it was a few feet away. Sometimes it was way off near the creek. I tried using a cheap motion-activated camera, setting it up on a tree facing the area where I worked. But each time I'd come back the next day and find the camera either knocked down or the batteries dead. I never got a single frame of footage. I tried a second camera, but the same thing happened. At one point, I actually shouted at the empty air. I stood there with my hands shaking and my voice cracking, yelling, "Leave my stuff alone, I'm not hurting you." It felt strange talking to nothing, but I was desperate. I was losing sleep and I couldn't focus on my plans for the house. I kept the bones locked away in my garage, untouched. I felt guilty about not contacting the police, but a part of me was worried they'd laugh at me or ask questions I couldn't answer. The next time I visited the site, I tried a different approach. I didn't bring any heavy equipment. I just walked around with a small satchel, took notes, and tried to act calm. My heart was pounding the whole time. I decided to talk out loud, explaining what I was doing. I said things like, "I'm clearing this land so I can build a house for myself. I'm not trying to destroy anything important." My voice sounded shaky. I felt silly, but I hoped whatever was there would hear my intentions. While I was speaking, I heard a crack behind me. I jumped and spun around. A branch had fallen off a dead tree. It wasn't that big, but it made a loud noise. I stared at it, feeling my pulse race. I exhaled and walked away slowly. That was enough for one day. I kept going back, but I struggled to make progress. Each time I tried to dig or clear an area, I'd find my tools moved. I started bringing my equipment back to my truck whenever I took a break, even if it was only for a minute. That slowed me down. Each day I felt more drained. My shoulders were stiff and my eyes burned from lack of sleep. I kept expecting to see someone jump out of the bushes, but nobody ever did. Eventually, I reached a point where the foundation area was set, but I hadn't poured any concrete. I was too uneasy to do it. I'd stand on the cleared ground, close my eyes, and imagine walls and a roof. Then I'd open my eyes and see that same vacant patch of earth, surrounded by overgrown brush and scattered rocks. My chest felt tight. My breaths came in shallow bursts. I couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone disapproved of my plans. One afternoon, I finally decided it was time to call the authorities about the bones. I dialed the local station, but they said I would need to bring what I found or schedule a time for someone to come out. I hung up. I realized I didn't want an official investigation if I could avoid it. I worried they might cordon off the property for weeks or longer. I just wanted to finish the house. Or maybe I didn't. Part of me was scared of what else they might find. That night, I sat in my living room and stared at the box holding those bones and the medallion. My chest felt heavy and my palms were sweaty. I imagined returning them to where I found them. But would that fix anything? I wasn't sure. The next morning, I drove back to the property with the box in my passenger seat. I walked to the spot where I first dug them up. I placed the bones and the medallion inside a small hole in the ground. I covered them gently with soil. I stood there feeling my heart beat hard. I said out loud, "I'm sorry if I disturbed anything. I just want to build my house and live peacefully." After that, I sat on a rock for a long time. The sun moved overhead and the shadows shifted around the trees. The stream made its usual low noise. I couldn't tell if things were different or not. I tried to work a bit more that day, gathering some stones for a perimeter. Nothing happened. My tools stayed where I left them. That night I slept better than I had in weeks, but the feeling never fully went away. Even now, when I drive out to that land, I feel a knot in my stomach. I haven't had any new incidents of scattered tools or torn bags of cement. I haven't heard more strange sounds in the brush, but sometimes when I'm working in silence, I catch a faint movement out of the corner of my eye. I turn, and I see nothing, yet my pulse still spikes. My mind returns to those bones and that medallion. I wonder who they belonged to, and why the initials were so worn. Part of me wants to dig deeper, but another part of me thinks it's best to leave it alone. For now, I keep my distance. I do a little work each day, but I don't push my luck. If I sense tension, I back off. I take my tools with me when I leave, and I lock everything in the truck. The house is still a plan on paper. I don't know if I'll ever finish it, but I'm not ready to give up yet. This place drew me in for a reason. I got the land cheap, and I knew it was a risk. But I never imagined I'd uncover something that made me question every little sound and shadow. I'm trying to respect whatever's out there. Right now, I'm taking it slow. Every day I show up, I remind myself to stay alert, keep my senses open, and hope that whoever or whatever was disturbed is willing to let me continue. If it's not, I guess I'll find out soon enough. I never expected a couple of old photographs to cause so much trouble. I've always enjoyed wandering around thrift stores and antique shops. I like the musty smell of old furniture and the dust that settles on forgotten items. I'm not sentimental about most of it, but sometimes an object catches my eye. A few months ago, I found two black and white photographs from the late 19th century. They were portraits of two different people. Each person was staring straight ahead, dressed in what looked like formal attire from that era. Their expressions were hard to read. Something about those images drew me in, and I decided to buy them. I brought the photos home and set them on a table in my living room. The frames were solid wood, slightly chipped at the corners, and the glass showed little scratches. I could see that the photos were a bit faded. The individuals in them still looked sharp enough to reveal details of their facial features. One of them had a short beard and round glasses. The other was a woman with a high collar and her hair pinned up. Neither one was smiling. They looked stern, but that was typical for photographs of that time. After a few days, I decided to hang them in my hallway. I had a small corridor near the entrance of my bedroom that was mostly bare. I hammered in 2 nails and hung the frames side by side, leaving about a foot of space between them. I stepped back, looked at them for a minute, and felt satisfied. They added an interesting touch to the place. That same night, I was in my bedroom around midnight reading a book. The hallway light was off, but the living room light was on. From where I was sitting on my bed, I could see the edge of the hallway in my peripheral vision. At some point, I noticed a slight movement in the corner of my eye. It was just a flicker, like a shift of a shadow. I glanced up, but there was nothing unusual. I shrugged it off and went back to reading. A few minutes later, I felt a weird sensation like the air got heavier. I checked the thermostat on the wall. It read the same temperature as always. I told myself it was just my imagination. Over the next week, I started feeling uneasy whenever I passed the photographs. It was a subtle thing. My skin would prickle, and I'd become more alert, like I expected something to jump out. I looked around each time, hoping to find an obvious explanation. Maybe the dim lighting created odd shadows. Maybe I just wasn't used to having those pictures around. Still, every time I walked by, I felt my shoulders tense up. My breathing would speed up a bit, and I'd sense that I wasn't alone. One evening, I was in the living room watching TV when I heard a quiet sound in the hallway. It was like a gentle shuffle, as if someone brushed against the wall or the floor. I muted the TV and listened. Silence. I got up and flipped on the hallway light. The photographs were in the same position, nothing had fallen, no windows were open. The noise didn't repeat. I walked back to the couch feeling a knot in my stomach. My heart was beating faster than usual. I tried to focus on the show I was watching, but my mind kept drifting to that noise. It was too clear to be my imagination, but I had no evidence of anything else. A few nights later, I was awake past midnight again, scrolling through my phone in bed. My bedroom door was open and the hallway light was off. I looked up from my phone for a second and thought I saw a shape at the far end of the hallway. I felt a spike of fear in my chest. I sat up, letting my phone fall to my side. My eyes strained in the darkness, trying to see details. The shape was gone as soon as I focused on it. My heart was pounding. I grabbed the small flashlight I keep in my nightstand and pointed it down the hallway. Nothing. Just the two old portraits on the wall. I breathed out, telling myself I was tired. The next morning, I decided to examine the photos up close. I took them off the wall and set them on my kitchen table. I wanted to see if there was anything odd about them that I hadn't noticed before. I ran my fingers along the edges of the frames. The backs were nailed shut, and there wasn't any label or writing. The photographs themselves were standard portraits of that time. The woman wore a long dress with a high neckline. The man had a serious expression, with a small watch chain visible at his waist. I didn't see any obvious reason to be freaked out. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I put the photos back on the wall, telling myself I was overreacting. That evening, I invited a friend over. I didn't say anything about the weird stuff. I just said I wanted some company. We talked, had a couple of beers, and eventually ended up sitting in the living room. My friend noticed the pictures when he went to use the bathroom. He walked back into the living room and said, "Hey, those are interesting. Where'd you get them?" I told him about the thrift store. He shrugged and said they looked old, but nothing else. I asked if he felt anything strange about them. He squinted and said, "They're a little creepy, but so are most old photos, right?" He didn't seem disturbed by them. The weird occurrences got more frequent after that. I heard knocking in the hallway a couple of times, always late at night. It was a gentle, rhythmic tap, like knuckles on wood. When I got up to check, there was no one there. I started feeling cold spots in the hallway. I'd walk from the living room, which felt normal, into a patch of air that felt several degrees cooler. It would last a few seconds and then disappear. I tried to recreate it by turning on the air conditioner, but I couldn't make it happen on purpose. One night, I decided to film the hallway. I set up my phone on a chair in the living room, with the camera facing the corridor and the pictures. I turned off most of the lights except a lamp in the living room and pressed record. I went back to my couch and stared at the screen of my phone, which was capturing a live view. For about 10 minutes, nothing happened. Then I heard a click near the bathroom door, but I didn't see anything move on the screen. I got up to check. Everything seemed normal. I kept recording for another 20 minutes, but nothing else occurred. When I watched the footage later, I only saw me checking the bathroom door. No strange shapes or flickers. Over the following days, I found myself avoiding the hallway at night. I'd hurry past it if I needed to grab something from my bedroom. My pulse would kick up and I'd feel sweat gathering on my forehead. Even if I left the hallway light on, I felt uneasy. At one point, I considered throwing the photos away. But something stopped me. I felt a curious pull toward them. I couldn't decide if I was being rational or if I was just letting fear consume me. One weekend, I had trouble sleeping. I stayed up until 2 a.m, pacing around the living room. The house was quiet. I kept glancing at the hallway. It was dark and still. At some point, I decided to confront it head-on. I walked down the hallway and stopped in front of the photos. I stood there, staring at them. My heart was thumping hard. I lifted one hand and touched the glass. It was cool. I looked into the frame, focusing on the woman's eyes. They were faintly visible, but I imagined they were boring into me. I stayed there for a few minutes. My mouth felt dry, and my legs felt tense, like I was ready to run if something happened. Nothing did. The hallway stayed silent. After a while, I stepped away, feeling a weird sense of accomplishment, like I had faced a fear. I went to bed and slept without any strange noises waking me up. The next morning, I felt more at ease. I told myself the whole thing was just my nerves and that maybe my mind was playing tricks on me because of those old photos. A few days later, though, I had a jolt of terror that I still can't fully explain. I was coming out of the bathroom when I looked toward the photos. I saw a faint silhouette standing near them, maybe a foot away from the wall. It wasn't a reflection, and it wasn't a shadow cast by anything I recognized. It looked like a person's outline, but it was hazy. I froze in place. My heart beat so loudly in my ears that I felt unsteady. The figure shifted slightly, then faded. I couldn't see any facial features. I just sensed a presence. I gasped and took a step back. My arm bumped the bathroom door. I thought I might pass out, but I forced myself to stay on my feet. A few seconds later, the hallway looked normal again. I rushed to my bedroom, shut the door, and sat on the edge of my bed, trying to catch my breath. My chest felt tight and my hands were clammy. I kept replaying the image in my head. It didn't look like a trick of the light. I stayed in my bedroom for the next hour, too nervous to go out. Eventually, I gathered my courage, grabbed both pictures off the wall, and placed them in a box. I put the box in a closet in the spare room and closed the door. I told myself that was it. I wouldn't let those things mess with my mind anymore. That night, I slept with the hallway light on. I didn't see or hear anything unusual. The next day, I felt relieved. It seemed like removing the pictures from sight lifted a huge weight from me. For about a week, I left the pictures in that closet. I didn't hear any knocking, no footsteps, no silhouettes. I started feeling normal again. I went about my routine, worked during the day, watched TV in the evenings, and slept with no problems. But every time I went into that spare room, I felt uneasy, like the pictures were sitting there waiting for me. I tried to ignore that feeling, but it lingered. One afternoon, I decided to give them away. I figured someone else might just see them as old photos with no significance. I considered dropping them off at a different thrift store. I carried the box to my car and set it in the trunk. I drove to a local antique shop. It wasn't the one I originally bought them from, but it was on the same street. I walked in and asked the owner if he'd take them. He asked to see them first. I opened the box on the counter. He inspected the frames, nodded, and said he'd put them in the back. He didn't comment on anything strange about them. He just asked me if I was sure I wanted to leave them. I said yes. That night, I felt a surge of relief. I walked through my hallway with the lights off, and it was just a regular hallway. No cold spots, no shadowy outlines. I sat on my couch and flipped through channels on the TV, realizing how tense I'd been before. I took a deep breath and let my shoulders relax. Since then, I haven't seen or heard anything odd in my home. No strange sounds, no flickers of movement in the corner of my eye, nothing that made me shudder. I don't know if those photographs were truly the cause or if it was just my imagination running wild. All I know is that ever since I got rid of them, my place feels normal again. Even now, I don't like to think about those nights when I heard tapping or sensed someone behind me in the hallway. I still feel a twinge of discomfort when I remember that faint silhouette near the pictures. I can't explain it. I'm just glad it's over. I've learned my lesson about bringing home old objects with unknown histories. Next time I'm in a thrift store or an antique shop, I'll be more careful. Or maybe I'll stick to books and vinyl records. Anything but old photographs of strangers who refuse to fade away. I heard the chime for the first time when I got home from a distant relative's funeral. It was late and I was in no mood for surprises. I had placed the wooden wind chime in my office because I didn't want it near my bedroom. My grandfather, the man who made it, died before I was born, so I never got the chance to see him at work. Mom always said he loved to build small gadgets. She still has some of his old drawings in a box somewhere. That night I was sitting on the couch in the living room feeling drained from the day, and out of nowhere I heard the chime ring. The sound was soft but distinct. I turned off the TV, listened, and heard it again. I thought maybe a window was open, but the house was sealed up tight. I walked to the office. The door was half open. When I pushed it fully, I noticed no breeze. Nothing that would make that wind chime move. I stood there for a while, waiting to see if it would ring again, but it stayed silent. My heart was beating fast, and I remember rubbing my palms together because they were sweaty. I turned on every light in the office, checked the corners, and waved my hand around the chime. It didn't swing, it didn't make a sound. I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination, or maybe something outside had bumped the wall. I turned off the lights, stepped out, and closed the door behind me. About an hour later, my phone rang. It was past midnight, and I saw my cousin's name on the screen. I braced myself because late-night calls rarely bring good news. When I answered, she told me our great-aunt, my grandfather's sister, had passed away earlier that night. I swallowed hard because I felt a strange knot in my stomach. The timing was too close to ignore. I glanced at the office door and felt an uneasy sweat trickle down my forehead. For the next few days, I didn't go near that wind chime. I kept the office door shut and tried to ignore it, but I found myself thinking about it whenever the house was quiet. I kept wondering if I'd hear it ring on its own again. I was working from home during that week, so I had a lot of time in the house. The slightest creak in the walls put me on edge. I'd pause my typing, take off my headphones, and listen. Each time I did that, the back of my neck felt tense. My mind kept going back to that first ring. It sounded too clean and purposeful to be random. I decided one afternoon to go into the office and look at the wind chime in plain daylight. It was on a small hook on the wall near the window. The chime itself looked simple, just a few wooden tubes and a small piece of wood in the center that could knock against them. I ran my fingertips over the tubes. They felt smooth, and they made a delicate click when they touched each other. The piece that held them together was just a small wooden ring. There was a bit of string, and it looked old but not frayed. I gave the chime a gentle push. It swayed and made a soft sound. Then I let it settle. I stood there for a full minute, watching for any movement. Nothing happened. I scanned the window frame. It was closed. No drafts of air were coming in. The house's air conditioning was on, but it wasn't blowing directly on the chime. I couldn't find any reason for it to move on its own. I felt a bit foolish, so I told myself to stop obsessing over it, but part of me still remembered the call I got that same night. It was too much of a coincidence for me. I decided to keep the chime where it was, but made sure the door stayed closed, especially at night. If it rang again, I didn't want to hear it. It wasn't even about being scared of a ghost or anything like that. I was just uncomfortable with the reminder of my grandfather and the weird timing with my great-aunt's passing. A few days later, Mom visited me to drop off some groceries she'd picked up. She asked if I still had Grandpa's old wind chime. I hesitated. "Yeah, it's in the office," I said. She told me Grandpa used to make all kinds of small wooden items. Then she asked if I'd heard it ring. I froze a bit because she said it so casually. I just told her I heard it once, but figured it was nothing. She smiled, looked at me, and said, "Your grandfather loved that piece. He said it brought him good luck." Then she changed the subject to something else. I was relieved she didn't press further, because I didn't want to explain the strange phone call or how I'd gotten goosebumps from a piece of wood. That night, I was alone, watching some random show in the living room. The office door was closed. Around 10 o'clock, I heard a dull clunk from behind that door. My body stiffened. I paused the TV again and listened. It didn't sound like a ring, more like a piece of wood knocking against the wall. I got up slowly, not sure if I should check it out or leave it alone. My feet felt heavy on the floor. My pulse was a bit faster than normal. I could feel sweat gathering at my temples. I walked up to the door. I placed my hand on the doorknob and took a breath. I twisted the knob and nudged the door open. The room was dark, so I reached for the light switch. The overhead light flickered on. I looked around. The wind chime was swaying slightly, like it had been touched or nudged. My eyes went to the window again, still closed. I checked the vents. None were pointed at the chime. I walked up to it and placed my hand on the wooden tubes, stopping them from moving. They came to a complete rest in my grasp. I stood there for maybe half a minute, listening to the sound of my own breathing. Nothing else moved. I let go and stepped back. It didn't make any more noise. The tension in my shoulders lessened, and I rubbed my arms because the air felt chilly. I left the room and shut the door, making sure to lock it this time. I never lock an interior door, but I did that night. The next day, I contacted a friend of mine who does basic home repairs. I asked him to come over and see if there was any reason the chime would move. He checked the insulation around the window and said it was fine. He looked at the air vents, found nothing unusual. He even tapped on the walls to see if there was some vibration from outside or from the central air system. Everything seemed normal. He shrugged and told me maybe the AC was making a small current. I thanked him and tried to act casual, but inside I felt a sense of unease. I didn't mention the phone call or the funeral. I didn't want to sound paranoid. That weekend I decided to put the wind chime in a box. I packed it in some newspaper, closed the box, and slid it into the closet in the hallway. I thought if it was out of sight, I would stop worrying about it. For the next several days, I didn't hear any strange sounds. I slept better. My office felt more comfortable. I even got more work done without constantly looking over my shoulder. It was a relief, and I started thinking maybe I'd just worked myself up after the funeral. But the following Friday, I was doing laundry, and I happened to open the closet in the hallway to grab a spare blanket. I saw that box sitting there. My stomach tightened a bit, but I tried to ignore that feeling. I grabbed the blanket, closed the closet, and went back to my laundry routine. Later that evening, I was getting ready for bed. While brushing my teeth, I heard a soft clink from the hallway. It wasn't loud or dramatic, just a quick light sound like a piece of wood tapping. I turned off the faucet and listened. The hallway was dim. I glanced over, and the closet door was still closed. I turned on the hallway light. Everything looked normal. I told myself to stop being jumpy and just go to bed. That night, I dreamt about an old workshop. I was standing at a wooden table, looking at some half-finished gadget. It had cogs and small pieces of metal. I could smell sawdust. I heard a series of soft taps behind me. When I turned around, I saw the wind chime hanging in the corner, barely visible in the dim light. I reached out, and the chime swayed. I jerked awake with a tight feeling in my chest. My eyes were wide and my heart pounded. I didn't move for a minute. I stared at the ceiling, breathing heavily. The room was dark, but I felt as if something was out of place. Eventually, my pulse slowed down and I rolled over, trying to calm myself. The next morning, I made a decision. I took the wind chime out of the closet. I set it on the kitchen table and examined it again. I didn't see anything strange about it. No hidden mechanism, no weird carving, just smooth wood. I touched each tube, felt how they were hollow, tapped them gently. I placed it down and looked at it for a long time. Then I took it outside to the backyard. I found a spot on my porch where there was a small hook near the edge of the roof. I hung the chime there in plain view of the sun and any breeze. I stepped back. It moved gently in the wind, making a soft clinking sound. It felt more natural to have it outside. I watched it for a few minutes. The air was cool and the slight breeze made me shiver, but at least I knew any movement out there would have an obvious cause. For a week, I left it there. During the day, I'd sometimes hear it faintly when I was in the living room or the kitchen, but it sounded normal, just a wind chime doing what wind chimes do. At night, I slept fine. No strange phone calls, no weird noises. I started to wonder if maybe that was all it took, just letting it be where it was meant to be. One afternoon, though, I went outside to water the potted plants near the porch, and I saw the chime lying on the ground. The hook was still attached to the roof, but the chime string had snapped. The wooden pieces were scattered. I picked them up, feeling a spike of frustration and dread. I checked the string and it looked worn out. Maybe it was old, or the wind had been too strong. I brought the pieces inside and placed them on the kitchen counter. The tubes were scratched in a few spots from the fall. I felt uneasy about it. I decided to fix it up. I went to a small craft store and bought new string. When I got home, I sat down at the table and carefully restrung the chime. I tried to match the original design. I tied strong knots, tested each tube to make sure it hung evenly, then lifted the chime up. It looked fine, a bit worn, but sturdy. While doing this, I couldn't shake the sense that I was meddling with something I should just leave alone. But I pushed that thought away. It was just a wooden wind chime my grandfather made. That was all. Once it was fixed, I left it on the table for the rest of the day. I didn't hear any noises from it. That night, I made sure to put it back outside on a different hook, one that looked more secure. It remained out there for a few more days without incident. Then one evening, I was sitting at the dining table with a sandwich and some paperwork. I heard the wind chime ring once, sharply. It sounded louder than usual, almost like a knock on a door. I set my sandwich down. My stomach felt tense again. I stood up and walked to the back door. I switched on the porch light. The wind wasn't blowing. The trees in my yard were pretty still, yet the chime was moving gently, as if someone had given it a small push. I slid open the door and stepped onto the porch. I looked around the yard. Everything seemed quiet. I touched the chime. It steadied. I looked around once more, felt the hair on my arm stand up, then went back inside and locked the door. After that, I decided to keep my distance. I left the wind chime outside, but I stopped checking on it unless I needed to water the plants. If it fell, I'd pick it up and hang it back. But I didn't linger. I still remembered the night it rang in my office and the call that came soon after. Even though I told myself it was a coincidence, a part of me didn't want it near where I sleep. I guess I couldn't shake the connection between that unexpected ring and the news about my great aunt. Whenever I thought about hanging it somewhere inside, I felt a clench in my gut. So I didn't. These days, the wind chime just hangs out there on the porch. Sometimes I see it sway in a strong breeze, making that steady, simple sound. It's not fancy. The wood is plain, no carvings or patterns. It's a basic piece of craftsmanship, something my grandfather made with his own hands. But I avoid dwelling on it too much. I haven't heard it ring indoors again since I moved it outside for good. I keep telling myself that whatever happened that night was just a fluke. I don't mention it to most people. They'd probably say it was my imagination or that I was tired from the funeral. Still, when the sun goes down and the house gets quiet, I sometimes catch myself listening for any faint chime sound coming from the office or the hallway. I know the thing's outside, but I listen anyway. I can't help it. My shoulders tense up, and I feel the air around me, checking for any unexplained draft. If I hear something, I tell myself it's just the wind. If I don't, I try to forget about it. But I never put that wind chime in my bedroom or any other part of the house. I figure it's best to keep some space between us. I don't have any logical explanation for it. All I know is, I don't want to relive that first night. If something that simple can leave me this uneasy, I'd rather keep it at a safe distance. And so far, that's worked well enough. I sleep better, and I don't jump at shadows in my own house. The chime stays outside, and I don't question it too much. That's how I handle it now, and honestly, I prefer it that way. I never expected a simple online auction to turn my life upside down. Yet here I am, in my living room at 2 a.m, staring at an old doll that shouldn't be here. My hands are shaking, and I can feel cold sweat gathering at the back of my neck. I want to tell this story because I still need someone to believe me. I don't have any proof, and I'm not sure I want it. But everything I'm about to say happened just like this. My name is David, and I live alone in a small single-story house. It's got 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, a living room, and a narrow backyard with an old wooden fence. I don't have roommates, and I don't usually have many visitors. I spend a lot of my free time online, browsing auction sites for vintage items. I've collected a few oddities over the years, like an antique lamp from 1920 and a typewriter from 1935. I enjoy that kind of stuff. It makes my place feel unique. About a month ago, I stumbled across a listing for a doll. It was from around 1950, according to the seller. The description said it had original clothing, a porcelain face, and delicate features. The photos caught my attention right away. The doll wore a faded blue dress with lace around the collar and cuffs. Its hair was synthetic but styled to look like old-fashioned curls. The eyes were a deep brown, glassy, and oddly realistic. The auction had a low starting bid, so I figured I'd throw in an offer. I won it pretty easily, actually. Hardly anyone else bid on it. I contacted the seller to arrange shipping. That's when the seller wrote something strange. They said, "I'm glad it's going to a new home. It's better that way." I asked what they meant, but they didn't say much else. They just gave me the tracking number and wished me luck. I didn't think too hard about that. Sometimes people get superstitious about old items, or maybe they just get creeped out by dolls. I shrugged it off. The doll arrived in a cardboard box that looked a little beat up. Inside, it was wrapped in layers of newspaper and bubble wrap. I remember the faint smell of mustiness, like it had been kept in an old trunk for years. When I lifted the doll out, I saw how detailed it really was. The face had small cracks in the porcelain near the hairline. The paint on the lips was chipped in one corner. The eyes were open and set in a way that made it look like it was staring right at me. The clothes had small stains and the lace was discolored, but overall it was in good shape. I set it on a shelf in my spare bedroom. That room is basically a storage space with a desk, some boxes, and the items I collect. At first, nothing strange happened. For about a week, the doll just sat there. I'd glance at it when I walked by, sometimes noticing that the eyes looked too real, but I assumed that was just my imagination. I didn't feel anything unsettling. In fact, I kind of liked having it. It was a cool piece of history. Then one night, I walked by that room on my way to the bathroom. The door was open, and the lamp in the hallway cast enough light for me to see inside. I paused for a second because I thought something looked different. The doll's head seemed to be tilted toward the door. I remembered placing it so that it faced the wall. I distinctly recalled that I set it down with its face looking away because I was worried about the eyes collecting dust or something. I shook my head, assuming maybe I misremembered. I walked in, turned on the light, and carefully set the doll's head so it was facing the wall again. Then I left. I'll admit I felt uneasy. My pulse was a little faster than usual, but I tried not to dwell on it. I told myself that maybe I just put the doll down at a slight angle. I tried to sleep, but I kept hearing little sounds. Most were normal house noises, creaks of the floor settling, the air conditioning clicking on and off. But in my half-asleep state, each noise made my heart pound. I eventually fell asleep and woke up the next day feeling tired. The next night, something even more disturbing happened. I went to check on the doll after dinner. I wanted to be absolutely certain where it was facing. I was determined to keep track of the angle, so I placed it very deliberately. The face was pressed almost fully toward the wall, and I made sure it stayed that way. Then I left the room, shut off the light, and walked to the living room. I spent a couple of hours watching TV. I wasn't thinking about the doll at that point. Then, around 11 p.m., I got up to get ready for bed. I passed by the spare bedroom door and noticed it was slightly ajar, even though I'd left it open wide. I turned on the hallway light and nudged the door open. Immediately, I felt a chill. The doll was looking straight at me. Its head was turned toward the door again. I could see the reflection of the hallway light in its glass eyes. My stomach flipped. My mouth went dry. The hair on my arms stood on end. I told myself there had to be a logical explanation. Maybe I brushed against the door earlier and it shifted. Maybe the doll wasn't as secure on the shelf as I thought and it moved. But deep down, I felt an uncomfortable sensation in my gut. I couldn't ignore it anymore. That night I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured that porcelain face. The next morning I woke up feeling anxious and on edge. I decided I couldn't keep the doll. It was silly to let myself get so freaked out, but I wanted peace of mind. So I grabbed a cardboard box from my closet and some old newspapers. I wrapped the doll carefully and sealed the box with packing tape. I walked outside to my trash bin, lifted the lid, and dropped the box inside. It felt wrong, but I was too uneasy to keep it. Then I closed the lid and went back inside. I tried to push the thought of it out of my mind. I made some coffee, ate breakfast, and forced myself to focus on work. I work from home, so I spent hours at my desk, typing reports and answering emails. By lunchtime, I started to relax. My shoulders weren't so tense, and I felt like I could let out a breath I'd been holding for days. That relief vanished the next morning. I walked outside to grab the mail and I saw something leaning against my gate. It was that same box, slightly torn at one corner. It was propped upright, and the lid was unsealed. I stared at it, my heart hammering in my chest. I slowly stepped forward and opened the box. The doll was there, still wrapped in newspaper. I felt panic rising in my chest like a wave. My arms were shaking. My throat tightened. The air felt too cold for a sunny day. I checked my trash bin. It was empty because it had been collected earlier. Somehow the doll was out of the bin and waiting for me by the gate. I don't know if someone thought it was a mistake and pulled it out, or if it crawled there by itself. I know how insane that sounds, but there it was. I picked up the box and carried it inside. The doll's weight seemed heavier than before, but maybe that was just my anxiety. I set it on the kitchen table and stood there, looking at it. My skin was clammy, and I could feel my pulse in my temples. I wanted to throw it out again, but I couldn't risk a repeat of that experience. I decided to store it in the garage instead. I figured if someone was messing with me, they wouldn't know I'd put it there. I went to the garage and found an old plastic storage bin with a lid. I placed the doll inside, covered it with an old towel, and snapped the lid shut. Then I slid the bin onto a shelf in the corner. I stood there for a moment, heart still racing, trying to steady my breathing. Eventually, I walked back into the house and locked the door behind me. I forced myself to keep busy, cleaning the kitchen and vacuuming the living room. Each time I heard a soft creak from the garage side of the house, my heart skipped a beat. By evening, my nerves were shot. I called a friend of mine, Mark, just to talk about normal things. I didn't tell him about the doll because I felt embarrassed. I didn't want him to think I was losing it. We talked about sports and some TV shows. By the time I hung up, it was late, and I was exhausted. That night, I woke up around 2 a.m. I wasn't sure why. My heart was beating fast and my mouth felt dry. I looked at my phone. No notifications. I listened for any noises. At first, everything was quiet. Then I heard a faint tapping sound. It was coming from somewhere near the garage door. It was a repetitive, soft thump-thump like someone gently knocking on wood. My body tensed. My breath caught in my throat. I got out of bed slowly, grabbed a flashlight from my nightstand, and walked toward the kitchen. The tapping continued, steady and light. When I reached the door to the garage, I hesitated. My hand hovered over the doorknob. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I turned the knob and opened the door a crack, shining the flashlight inside. The tapping stopped. I stepped into the garage. It smelled like motor oil and dust. The flashlight beam swept over the concrete floor and the shelves. The storage bin was still in the corner. The lid looked secure. No one was in there. I approached the bin, each step echoing on the floor. My legs felt stiff, like I was on the verge of trembling. I rested a hand on the bin. It was cold to the touch. I didn't hear any noise coming from inside it. After standing there for a solid minute, I backed away and turned around, returning to the house. I locked the door behind me and double-checked every window. Then I tried to sleep again, but it took a long time. In the morning, I woke up tired and groggy. I went straight to the garage to see if the bin was still there. It was. The lid was secure, and everything looked normal. I decided I had to do something else. Throwing the doll away wasn't working. Keeping it in the garage was driving me insane. So I posted an ad online. I listed it as a vintage doll for free. I just wanted it gone. I got a response from a local collector. He said he'd pick it up that afternoon. I didn't mention anything strange about it. I told him it was in decent condition, just a little worn. He arrived in a pickup truck, a tall guy, maybe in his 40s. I handed him the storage bin, explaining that the doll was inside. He opened the lid, glanced at the doll, and nodded. He seemed pleased to get it. I felt a huge weight lift off my shoulders as he drove away. I thought, finally, that's done. That night, for the first time in days, I slept without interruptions. No weird noises, no tapping. My house felt calm again. I woke up feeling light and relieved. I made breakfast, did some work, and didn't think about the doll. Everything was normal for a whole day and a half. Then, early the following morning, I heard my doorbell ring. I got out of bed, heart pounding because I never get visitors that early. I checked the time on my phone, 7 a.m. I opened the door and there was no one there, but on my front step was the storage bin. The lid was ajar. Newspaper was sticking out. I recognized the same leftover packing material I'd used. I didn't want to touch it. I stood in my doorway, heart racing, breath coming in short bursts. Eventually, I steeled myself. I walked forward and looked inside. The doll was sitting upright, the same faded blue dress, the same cracked porcelain face. It was back. I felt dizzy. My stomach churned. I thought I might faint. I looked around the yard, the street, everywhere. No sign of the pickup truck guy. I didn't see a note either. It was just the bin and the doll. I didn't know what to do. I dragged the bin inside and shut the door quickly. My legs felt weak and I had to sit down on the couch. I stared at the bin, trying to control my breathing. That's where I'm at right now. The doll is in the bin, right here in my living room. I don't want it here, but I'm scared to move it. I'm afraid it'll just come back again or something worse will happen. My hands are shaking while I talk about this. I keep glancing at the bin, expecting the lid to pop open. I don't have answers. I only have what I've seen with my own eyes. It's an old doll from 1950, and it won't leave me alone. That's the whole story so far. I know it sounds crazy. I know people might say I'm imagining everything or that someone's playing a prank. But I've checked all the possibilities I can think of. Nobody I know has any motive to do this. The seller wouldn't bother tracking me down. The local collector disappeared without a trace. Yet this doll keeps ending up back at my house. I'm telling you this because I can't keep it to myself anymore. I don't know where it'll end or what else might happen. And right now, I'm too scared to find out. I got to the villa late on a Wednesday afternoon. The place looked old and sturdy, with walls that had chipped paint and uneven brickwork. I noticed a big stone wall right next to the property, running along the edge of a field. I was there for research on rural architecture, but I had no interest in local legends. That changed as soon as I checked in and spoke with the owner. He was a tall guy with a stern face. He welcomed me at the entrance. His hair was gray and short. He offered me a cup of coffee while he showed me around. The interior of the villa had wooden floors that creaked with each step. Dusty pictures hung on the walls in narrow hallways. The owner pointed out the guest room. It had a simple bed, a small table, and a single chair in the corner. The window faced that old stone wall. After he set my bags down, the owner said, "People came here now and then to look for some treasure." He said they believed there was gold or something valuable hidden in the base of that wall. I frowned at him because it sounded ridiculous, but he shrugged. He told me he sometimes heard noises at night, stones scraping, metallic clinks against the rock. He claimed no one was ever found digging, though. He said the next morning, everything would look normal, like nobody had touched a single stone. He told me to keep an eye out if I got curious. I wasn't sure if I believed him, but it felt like something I should note for my research. Maybe it was a local rumor to attract visitors. I decided to see the wall up close before dinner. I stepped outside, walked across a small patch of overgrown grass, and approached the stone structure. The wall was about 7 feet high, made of thick stone blocks. Some blocks had cracks filled with tiny weeds. Others had little patches of moss. I ran my hand over the surface. It felt cool and rough. Then I felt a sudden pressure building in my head. It felt like someone pressing on my temples. I moved back, shook my head, and the feeling faded. I didn't think much of it at first. Maybe I was just tired from my trip. I looked around to see if anyone else was nearby, but I saw no one. I stepped closer again, touching a different section of the wall. The same pressure came back. It wasn't painful, but it was uncomfortable, like a mild headache that focused on the top of my skull. My heartbeat sped up. I let go of the wall and backed off again. The pressure subsided, I went inside and asked the owner if he ever felt strange near that wall. He paused for a second and then said he never stood too close. He only knew the local tales and that sometimes visitors said they felt odd around it. He laughed a bit and guessed maybe it was just psychological. He told me not to worry. I nodded and dropped the subject. I felt uneasy, but I figured I'd just stay away from that wall unless I needed to check it for my research. That night, I had a quick meal in the villa's small dining room. The owner had a simple dinner ready, rice, beans, and some roasted vegetables. We didn't talk much. He seemed tired, and I was busy thinking about my schedule. By the time I finished eating, it was almost dark outside. I went to my room and unpacked a few things. Around 11, I heard scraping noises. I put down my pen and listened closely. It sounded like someone shifting small rocks around. I opened my window and looked out. I couldn't see much. The night sky was cloudy, and the only light came from a single lamp near the villa's main door. The stone wall was just a dark shape. I considered going outside, but I felt a bit uneasy about it. The noise stopped after a minute or so. I waited another few minutes in silence, then closed my window. I tried to sleep, but around midnight I heard a faint clink again. It made me sit up in bed. My ears felt like they were straining to catch any sound. I forced myself out of bed and slipped on my shoes. I opened the door to my room quietly and walked down the hallway. My steps sounded too loud on the wooden floor. I opened the front door of the villa and stepped outside. The air was cool and damp. I moved toward the stone wall, taking careful steps on the grass to avoid noise. The scraping noise continued, but it sounded more distant than before. When I got close, it stopped completely. I stood there for a moment, trying to see if anyone was there. The darkness around me felt thick, but I saw no movement. I walked along the length of the wall, running my flashlight over it. The beam lit up the cracks in the stones. Everything looked still. I bent down and touched one of the stones near the ground. It was firm. Nothing seemed loose or disturbed. I stayed out there for a few minutes, waiting. I heard nothing else. I felt that pressure creeping back into my head, though. It was the same sensation as before, a dull force that pushed at the top of my skull. I took a step back and the pressure started to decrease. I decided I'd had enough for the night. I went back inside and tried to sleep again. The next morning, I woke up early. I wanted to see the wall in daylight and check for any signs of tampering. I walked outside at around 7. The sky was clear, and the sun was just starting to shine on the villa's yard. I studied the wall from left to right. Every stone looked like it was in place. No fresh dirt, no loose rocks on the ground. I leaned in a bit closer at one point, but the pressure came back. I felt sweat forming on my forehead, even though it wasn't hot. I stepped back again. I felt my hands trembling a little. It was mild, but I noticed it. I decided I wouldn't touch the wall again unless I had a solid reason to. That day, I focused on my research. I drove to a nearby town to look at an old church and talk with the local historical society. During the drive, I kept thinking about that pressure in my head. I kept hearing those scraping noises in my memory. I forced myself to concentrate on the road. By the afternoon, I was back at the villa with a notebook full of notes about local architecture, but I felt no closer to understanding what was happening near that wall. I saw the owner in the courtyard sweeping some leaves. I asked if anyone else had reported those noises that night. He said I was the only guest and he hadn't left his room after 10. He looked a bit concerned, but told me not to get too wrapped up in the rumors. Then he offered me a glass of water. I drank it, feeling my throat was dry, and thanked him. That evening, after dinner, I felt restless. My curiosity about the wall had grown. I hated the idea of not understanding something so close. I decided I would stay up and keep watch from my window. I turned off the lights in my room around 10, but I stayed near the window. The sky was clear, and the moon provided a bit more light than the previous night. Around 11, I heard a soft scraping noise again. It wasn't constant. It sounded like short bursts of someone moving stones and then stopping. I held my breath and peered out my window. I could see the shadow of the wall, and I thought I saw a figure standing close to it. I couldn't be certain, but it seemed like someone was there. My heart pounded as I considered my options. I grabbed my flashlight, slipped on my shoes, and went into the hallway. Every board under my feet squeaked. I cringed but kept going. Outside, I moved around the side of the villa, keeping my flashlight off at first. I walked carefully, eyes on the wall. I heard another scraping noise. It was louder this time, like someone chipping at a stone. When I was about 20 feet away, I switched on the flashlight and pointed it at the wall. The noise stopped immediately. I took another few steps forward. I heard a rustling sound, like cloth brushing against stone. Then there was silence. I shined the light along the base of the wall, saw nothing but weeds and dirt. No tools, no footprints that I could make out. My palms felt clammy, and I wiped them on my pants. The pressure in my head started up again, stronger this time. My vision felt a bit narrow, so I leaned against the villa's outer wall and took a few deep breaths. I called out, "Who's there?" My voice sounded shaky. I waited. Nothing answered. The air felt cold against my face. I forced myself to approach the stone structure one more time. I looked at the blocks near the ground. I couldn't see any fresh marks or anything that looked like it had been dug up. My head pounded a bit, so I stepped back again. The sensation started to ease off. I stayed out there for maybe 10 minutes, shining the light around, listening for footsteps. Nothing. Eventually, I went back to my room. My mind wouldn't settle. I paced around for a few minutes. I sat on the edge of the bed, thinking about what could cause that head pressure. My arms felt tense and my shoulders ached. I tried to rub my neck to relax. I ended up lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, waiting for morning. The next few days followed a similar pattern. I'd work on my research during the day, but at night I kept hearing those strange sounds. I tried approaching the wall multiple times. Each time I felt that crushing sensation around my skull. Each time the sound stopped before I could catch anyone. I began to think maybe I was missing something obvious, but the lack of any evidence of tampering baffled me. The stones were always intact, no holes or loose dirt around. The owner seemed worn out. He told me it was part of life there. People claimed the wall was haunted or enchanted. Some believed in the treasure story. He thought it was a hoax or some local trick. On my last night, I decided to try a different approach. I set up a small camera on my windowsill, pointed at the wall. I turned off all my lights and left the camera rolling. I sat at the foot of my bed, waiting. Around midnight, I heard that scraping again. It was quiet, but steady this time. I didn't move. I watched the camera's live feed on my phone. The small screen showed the dark outline of the wall. The scraping noise continued for about 3 minutes, but the video showed no one there. No movement at all. I felt my pulse racing. My mind tried to find a logical explanation. Maybe it was an animal or shifting stones. But the stones never showed any movement in the morning. The camera footage was empty. Then the scraping stopped. My head started to pound even though I wasn't near the wall. I pressed my hand to my forehead, massaged the skin above my eyebrows. The pressure made me feel dizzy. It faded after a minute. I slept poorly that night. In the morning, I packed my bags. I went outside to do one final check around the wall. I didn't get too close this time. I just walked along the yard, scanning the stones from a distance. Same as before, it all looked normal. I felt a faint pressure in my head, like an echo of the stronger pains. I forced myself to ignore it and headed back to the villa. I paid the owner, thanked him, and told him I appreciated the hospitality. He just nodded and said he was sorry about the odd noises at night. He said he hoped it hadn't caused me too much trouble. I shrugged. I couldn't explain it, so I didn't try. I loaded my bags into my car and started the engine. Before I drove off, I looked over at the stone wall one last time. It stood there, silent and solid. I felt a slight tightness in my temples. I faced forward, gripped the steering wheel, and drove away. As I left, the feeling in my head slowly lifted. My body felt lighter. My shoulders relaxed a bit and my grip on the wheel loosened. I kept an eye on the rearview mirror for a while, half expecting to see some figure standing there or some stones moving on their own. I saw nothing out of the ordinary. just a quiet villa and an old wall that refused to give up its secrets. I never found out what caused those noises. I never saw a single person actually digging. I never discovered any hidden treasure. But that pressure in my head felt real every time I got near that wall. Maybe it was just stress or suggestion. Maybe there was more to it. All I know is that whenever I think back to that place, my temples feel tight for a moment, like my body remembers something I can't explain. I try not to dwell on it, but sometimes at night I recall the scraping sounds, and I feel a tingle in my forehead. It makes me wonder if someone or something is still out there, shifting those stones in the dark. I got back from the Caribbean cruise feeling relaxed and a little sunburned, but I didn't expect anything strange to happen afterward. I was excited to show off my souvenirs, talk about the tropical beaches, and laugh about the late-night parties on the ship. Instead, I found myself waking up to quiet whispers in my own home, wondering if I was losing my mind. I'm still not sure how it all started, but I can pinpoint the moment things got weird. The day I brought that black patchwork doll into my house. I bought the doll at a small street market during one of the cruise stops. The place was crowded with locals selling hand-carved trinkets, woven bags, and colorful masks. I wandered around, just looking for something unique to bring back. An older man stood at a corner table, smiling in a calm way, like he knew I'd show up. He had this small doll made of black fabric scraps with odd symbols stitched all over its body. The thread was coarse, and the doll's arms and legs were thin and uneven. I picked it up, felt the rough texture, and asked him what it was. He said it was traditional in his village. He didn't explain much else. I looked at it, shrugged, and asked for the price. He gave me a small number, so I handed him some cash and slipped the doll into my bag. I remember him looking at me with serious eyes, but I didn't think about it too much at the time. When I got home, I tossed my suitcase in my bedroom and placed the doll on a shelf in the living room. I didn't have a clear idea of how to display it, so I just leaned it against a stack of old DVDs. That first night, I slept without any trouble. I was exhausted from the flight and the taxi ride home, so I crashed on my bed in my clothes. The next day, I unpacked, did laundry, and tried to get back into my routine. At around midnight, I sat on the couch watching a random TV show. My eyes felt heavy, so I turned off the television and headed to my bedroom. As I passed the living room shelf, I glanced at the doll. Its head drooped forward, the embroidered eyes pointing down. The symbols on its body looked a little creepy in the dim light, but I told myself it was just a harmless souvenir. I fell asleep, but I woke up a few hours later. My room was quiet except for a faint buzzing from the hallway light fixture. I heard a whisper, soft and drawn out, coming from the direction of the living room. At first, I thought it might be the wind outside, but it sounded more like a voice repeating short phrases that I couldn't understand. My heart pounded against my ribs, and my mouth went dry. I stayed still, listening. After 10 or 20 seconds, it faded. I got up, reached for the small flashlight on my nightstand, and crept toward the living room. I didn't turn on the main lights. I just aimed the flashlight around. Nothing seemed out of place. The windows were closed. The door was locked. The clock on the wall read 3 in the morning. Then I shone the light on the shelf where I had placed the doll. It lay on its side, not leaning against the DVDs anymore. I couldn't recall if I had left it like that, so I shrugged it off and put it back in a sitting position. I felt a bit uneasy, but I told myself it must have slipped. I went back to bed, trying to calm my breathing. Sleep eventually came, but it was restless. The next night, I tried to ignore my nerves. I had dinner, played some music, and answered a few emails. I caught myself glancing at the doll more than once. It didn't move or shift, but I felt uneasy with it in the house. Around midnight, I turned off the lights and went to my bedroom. I lay there in the dark, my mind drifting. An hour later, I heard it again, that hushed, repetitive murmur. It came from near the door to my living room, or maybe near the window. My stomach twisted. I rubbed my temples, wondering if I was half asleep. The whispering persisted. My heart thumped. and I got out of bed. This time, I flipped on every light switch on my way to the living room. The second the lights illuminated the room, the whispering stopped. I stood in the middle of the living room, listening to my own breathing. Then I looked at the shelf. The doll lay face down this time, its arms spread wide. My chest felt tight. The only explanation was that it fell off balance. I leaned down, touched it, and felt the stiff, uneven stitching along its head and neck. I propped it upright again, placing it so it wouldn't topple over. I turned around, checked the door and windows, and saw no sign of forced entry. Everything was locked. Eventually, I went back to bed, but I couldn't sleep well. Over the next few days, the same pattern continued. I'd hear whispers late at night, always in short bursts, always in a strange tone that didn't match any language I knew. I tried recording it with my phone once. I set it to record, placed it on the living room table, and waited. I heard the whisper, but when I played the audio back, there was only silence. No static, no voices, just dead air. My hands shook when I realized I couldn't capture the sound. I started to wonder if I was hallucinating. I even made an appointment with my doctor, thinking maybe I was overtired or stressed. The medical check showed nothing unusual. One night I woke up to a sharp thump near the living room. I jumped out of bed, legs shaking, and hurried to see what happened. The doll was on the floor, close to the window. The shelf was a few feet away, so it must have fallen pretty far. I picked it up and felt a chill on the back of my neck. The cloth was cold, almost damp. I heard another whisper right behind me, but I spun around and there was nobody there. I clenched my jaw, telling myself to calm down. I put the doll back on the shelf and pressed my hands against my face. My palms were sweaty. I wondered if I should throw the doll out. But a part of me felt like that might not solve anything. Maybe the doll had nothing to do with it. Or maybe it had everything to do with it. I wasn't sure anymore. I started sleeping with the bedroom door locked. I knew it was pointless if something supernatural was going on, but it made me feel a little safer. My nights turned into a series of jolts awake, straining to hear if the whisper had started again. Usually it did. It always stopped the moment I turned on the lights. I checked every corner, expecting to find some trick or hidden speaker, but I never found any explanation. One evening, I decided to test a theory. I took the doll and locked it in a small storage closet near the laundry area. I placed it in a shoebox, sealed it with tape, and slid it to the back of the closet. Then I closed the closet door and jammed a chair against the handle. I wanted to see if I still heard those whispers. At around 3 in the morning, I woke up to that same low voice. It sounded more muffled this time, like it was coming from behind a wall. My hands shook and my breath was shallow. I grabbed my phone, turned on the flashlight, and walked toward the laundry area. The chair was still in place, the closet door was closed. Yet I heard the voice from inside, a low, rhythmic chant. My scalp tingled and my knees felt weak. I yanked the chair away and opened the door. The shoebox was on the floor, lid still taped. When I opened the box, the doll lay there, motionless, no sign of movement. But the whispering had stopped. My mouth felt dry, and my pulse raced. I taped the box shut again, pushed it back into the closet, and slammed the door. I wanted to forget about it, but I couldn't. I started keeping all the lights on at night. My electricity bill jumped, but I didn't care. I took cat naps during the day because my nights were nerve-wracking. Even with the lights on, I sometimes heard the whispering near my front door. I'd rush over, yanking the door open to see if there was someone outside, but the hallway would be empty. I wondered if my neighbors heard anything. Nobody said a word to me. Maybe it was too soft for anyone else to notice. One afternoon, I decided I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed a plastic bag from under my sink and marched to the closet. I ripped the tape off the shoebox and pulled out the doll. It felt heavier than before, like it had absorbed moisture or something. I stuffed it into the bag and drove to a thrift shop a few miles away. I got out of my car, walked to the drop-off box, and tossed it in. My hands trembled as I let go of the bag. I knew it was a weird thing to do, but I was desperate to get that doll out of my home. When I got back, the place felt emptier. I tried to stay positive. I cooked a simple dinner, turned on the TV, and tried to relax. That night I slept better. I didn't wake up to whispers or strange noises. The next evening, things stayed quiet too. I started to feel normal again. I told myself I must have been imagining things, and that my mind created those whispers because I was spooked by the doll's creepy appearance. But after 3 nights of peace, I came home late from work. When I walked into the living room, I flipped on the light, and my breath caught in my throat. The doll was sitting on my coffee table right in the center. No bag, no explanation. The same black patchwork, the same stitched symbols. It was angled so its face pointed right at me. My shoulders tensed, and my fingers went numb. I slammed the door shut behind me and locked it. I checked every window, every lock, every room. No sign of forced entry. Nothing was missing except for my sense of safety. I had no plan for what to do next. I felt panic tighten my chest and I started shaking. My head pounded. I picked the doll up, walked outside to the garbage chute at the end of the hallway, and tossed it in. I let the heavy door slam shut behind it. Then I walked back into my apartment, breathing hard. My skin tingled all over and my shirt stuck to my back with sweat. That night I tried to stay awake in my bed with the lamp on. Around 2 in the morning I nodded off. I don't know how long I slept, but I woke up to the whisper again. This time it was next to the bedroom door. I bolted upright, grabbed a baseball bat I keep under my bed for emergencies, and flipped on the overhead light. The whisper cut off. I opened the bedroom door. The doll was there, sitting upright on the floor. The embroidered eyes seemed to stare at me. I froze. My vision narrowed. I dropped the bat and clenched my fists, at a complete loss for what to do. I scooped up the doll, my breathing ragged, and flung open my front door. I didn't care that it was the middle of the night. I drove out of town, about 30 minutes away, to a small park with an open trash can near the entrance. I yanked the doll out of the car and shoved it into the can. Then I got back in my vehicle and sped home. My fingers were stiff on the steering wheel. I kept checking my rearview mirror, half expecting to see something in the back seat. Nothing was there. Since that night, I haven't seen the doll again. I try not to think about it. I keep the television on for noise and sleep with my phone by my ear, playing music. Sometimes I catch myself worrying that the whispers will return. Late at night, I'll pause whatever I'm doing and listen. I've heard a few odd creaks in the walls, but no whispers. I haven't found the doll anywhere in my apartment. It might stay gone this time, but I'm on edge. I can't look at my shelves without remembering how I used to see it there, with those strange symbols sewn into its fabric. I'm not sure if there was ever a logical explanation, or if I got tangled up in something beyond my understanding. All I know is I never want to see that doll again, and if I ever go on another cruise, I'll think twice before buying anything labeled traditional. My life has been quiet for now, but that memory still makes my skin crawl. I don't hear the whispers anymore, yet I can't shake the feeling that they could start up at any moment. It's been a tense few weeks and I'm still jumpy at night, but at least I can sleep without waking up to that low, unfamiliar murmur. I keep telling myself I got rid of it for good. I guess only time will tell. I got this job at the Lakewood House in early May. I remember my first impression when I walked through the main doors. The place was bigger than I expected, and the ceilings felt like they went on forever. The manager handed me a set of keys and told me I'd be in charge of cleaning the hallways after midnight. I thought it would be easy. I needed the money, and I didn't mind working nights. But from the very start, people warned me about odd noises on the second floor. I laughed it off. I didn't see any reason to worry. It was an old building, and old buildings make strange sounds. That was my thinking on my first night. I arrived at around 11:30 p.m. My shift always started after most guests went to bed. The manager told me they'd hired me because they needed someone who wouldn't scare easily. People complained about footsteps overhead when no one was there. I heard those stories and figured it was just pipes or creaking floorboards. The older cleaning lady, Carmen, shook her head every time I brushed off the rumors. She said I'd see for myself. I said, "Okay," I'll handle it. The building sits right at the edge of the famous Lake Willow. From the outside, it looks like an old mansion that was turned into a guest house. It's 3 stories tall and the second floor doesn't get much use. The manager mentioned some structural issues up there, so they've been slow to rent out those rooms. Most guests stay on the first or third floors. It's cheaper and closer to the main dining area. The second floor halls stay dark after midnight. They keep the lights off to save power, or at least that's what I was told. On my first official night, I walked down the main corridor on the first floor. I pushed my cleaning cart in front of me. I had a mop, a broom, some spray bottles, and rags. The hall looked normal enough. Dark wallpaper, old paintings, a few large windows with thick curtains. I heard the distant hum of the lake outside. A gentle wind sometimes pushed branches against the windows, which caused soft scraping sounds. That didn't bother me too much, but I kept looking over my shoulder for some reason. I felt like I wasn't alone, even though I'd just seen the guests turn in for the night. At around midnight, Carmen joined me for a quick walkthrough. She kept talking about the second floor. She said, "They come out around now." I asked her who they were. She said, "Tall shadows, taller than any man I've ever seen." I nodded, but didn't say anything. I didn't believe in ghosts or spirits or anything like that, so I figured she was exaggerating. After a few minutes, she returned to her room, leaving me to do my job. I went around dusting and mopping the first floor hall. I wiped down the banisters on the big curved staircase that led up to the second floor. The steps creaked with every movement. The wood was old and the boards felt a bit soft under my feet. I looked up at the second floor landing. It was dark, but a small lamp in the corner cast a yellowish glow on the floor. I didn't see anything strange, so I finished my work on the first floor and decided to investigate the upper level. Part of my job was to tidy up all hallways, so I had to go upstairs eventually. When I got to the top of the stairs, I flipped a switch on the wall. One overhead light flickered and then stayed on, illuminating a narrow section of the corridor. The rest of the hallway was still in shadow. I pushed my cart a few steps forward. I immediately felt a chill. It wasn't cold air from the lake, because I'd have felt a draft. This was something else, like the atmosphere itself got heavier. I tried to ignore it. I started cleaning the floor, sweeping up dust and debris. The corridor floor was old hardwood. Each step made a slight squeak. My own footsteps echoed in a weird way, like the sound was bouncing off walls that were too close or maybe angled strangely. After a few minutes, I paused to check the other end of the hall. That's when I thought I heard a second set of footsteps. They were faint, like someone was walking in socks on a wooden floor. I stopped moving. The sound stopped too. I listened carefully. Nothing. I took a few steps again, and then I heard it once more. It seemed to match my pace, as if someone was following me at a distance. That set me on edge. I looked around for an explanation, maybe a loose floorboard that echoed in 2 different spots. But the footsteps seemed to come from behind me, around a corner. I called out, "Hello? Is anyone there?" No answer. I kept going, but my heart was pounding. I usually don't scare easily, but there's something about an empty corridor that can get under your skin. I turned the corner, pushing the cart slowly. The only light was that single overhead bulb behind me, so this new stretch of hallway was almost dark. I saw the outline of a big window at the far end. The curtains were closed, and the fabric looked thick. I felt a breeze, though, so maybe a draft was coming through the old frame. I figured I'd check if the window was locked. I walked over and reached out to part the curtains. As soon as I touched them, I felt a sense of unease. My hand was shaking a bit, and I didn't know why. The fabric felt damp and cold. I pulled one side back, trying to see if the window latch was secure. The glass was fogged up. I couldn't see outside, but I guessed the lake was somewhere out there in the darkness. I shut the curtain again and turned around. That's when I saw a quick movement in my peripheral vision, like something tall passing by the far end of the corridor. It was too fast to make out details. All I saw was a shape, maybe a head and shoulders that reached higher than any normal person's. I froze and stared. Nothing was there now, just a blank wall and closed doors. I told myself I was just tired. Maybe I'd worked too many shifts in a row. But I kept thinking about what Carmen said about tall shadows. My pulse felt strong in my temples, and my palms were sweaty. I left the curtains alone and went back to my cleaning cart. I decided to sweep the rest of the hallway quickly. The corridor wasn't that long, but it felt like it stretched on forever. Each door I passed had a small metal plaque with a room number. All the doors were locked. The manager said they didn't rent these rooms out often. Some needed renovation. I didn't hear any voices behind those doors and no lights shone from under them. I moved to the next section of floor. That's when I heard footsteps again, louder this time. They were behind me. I spun around and the corridor was empty. It wasn't the wind, and it wasn't my imagination. I know the difference between normal building sounds and the noise of real feet on wood. My legs felt heavy, and my mouth went dry. I forced myself to take a few deep breaths. I tried to think logically. Maybe a guest had wandered up here by mistake. Maybe one of the staff was playing a prank on me. I called out again. "Hey, who is that?" No response. I grabbed my flashlight from the cart and shone it around. I checked each side of the corridor. I checked the smaller side passages, the alcoves, even behind a potted plant near the stairs. No one was there. The air felt thick, like I was standing in a place I didn't belong. The silence was so intense that I could hear my heartbeat in my ears. That's when I heard a faint scraping sound. It came from behind one of the locked doors. I put my ear to the door, not sure what to expect. The sound stopped, and there was complete silence again. I decided I'd had enough for one night. I finished a quick sweep and headed back downstairs. I didn't see Carmen again, so I left her a note saying I'd done the best I could, but something felt off. I signed out of my shift around 2 a.m. I walked to my car in the staff parking lot. The wind coming off the lake was cold, and I kept glancing at the second floor windows. They were dark, but I thought I saw movement in one of them. I got in my car fast and drove home. The next evening, I arrived for my shift and found Carmen waiting by my cleaning cart. She asked how my night went. I told her what I heard, and she nodded like it was nothing new. She said she had seen those tall shapes many times over the years. She called them shadows, but she thought they were connected to the history of the house. She didn't give me many details, just said the place was built in the late 1800s, and that people sometimes talked about strange figures walking the halls. I asked if they ever did anything harmful. She shrugged and said they mostly just watched or appeared at a distance. That didn't make me feel much better. I started my rounds again, double-checking the first floor corridor. Nothing strange happened there. I headed up to the second floor around midnight. I took the same path, but this time I turned on every light I could find. Some bulbs were burnt out, but at least I had a bit more visibility. The corridor still felt oppressive, though. The walls seemed too narrow, and the air was stale. I kept my flashlight close. I mopped the floor near the window at the end of the hall. The curtains were still damp, and I had this weird feeling that someone was behind them, even though I'd checked the previous night. I tried to ignore it and focused on my cleaning tasks. At around 12:30 a.m., I heard a soft thud behind me. It sounded like someone gently knocking on a wall. I turned and aimed my flashlight. I saw nothing. Then I heard the knock again, down by the corner near one of the locked doors. I walked over carefully, holding my mop handle tight. I stood outside the door and waited. The knock came again. 3 soft taps. My throat felt tight, but I forced myself to speak up. "Hello? Do you need help?" Silence. I put my hand on the doorknob. It wouldn't turn. Then the knob rattled on its own, just a brief shaking motion. I stepped back, almost stumbling over my own feet. I watched as the knob went still. I didn't know what to do. The manager had said not to bother with locked rooms, but I felt a jolt of adrenaline, like I needed to see what was in there. I decided it wasn't worth it. I backed away and returned to my cart, never taking my eyes off that door. A few minutes later, the lights flickered. I guess the wiring upstairs is old. The corridor went dark for about 2 seconds, and my stomach twisted. I thought I'd see something in that brief blackout. When the lights came on again, everything looked the same. I almost wished they'd stayed off because the tension was worse with the flickering. I tried to pick up the pace and finish my tasks. I still had trash bins to empty and some wiping down to do. As I moved toward the far end of the hall, I felt that heavy sensation again, like the air was pressing on me. My ears started ringing slightly. I heard footsteps behind me, faster this time, like someone running. I spun around, shining my flashlight. I caught a glimpse of a dark shape darting into a side passage. It was tall, much taller than me. I stand about 6 feet, and this thing looked like it had a foot or two on me, maybe more. The shape was black, and I couldn't see a face or clothing. It moved quickly, like a shadow that had gained substance for a second and then vanished. My skin broke out in goosebumps, and my breath got shallow. I wanted to run downstairs right then, but my pride told me I needed to confirm what I'd seen, so I walked toward the side passage. My footsteps felt unsteady. My legs were trembling. The small hallway there led to a tiny storage closet and a locked door that went nowhere. I aimed my flashlight around, but the space was empty. No footprints, no sign of anyone. The door was locked and the closet was full of old chairs and boxes. Nothing else. I decided I'd done enough for the night. I rushed back to the staircase, leaving my cleaning cart in the corridor. I figured I'd get it later or send someone else to get it. As soon as I reached the top of the stairs, I heard another series of footsteps coming from behind. They weren't in sync with mine this time. They moved slower, like someone taking deliberate steps. I didn't look back. I just raced down the stairs, practically jumping the last few steps. When I reached the bottom, I finally glanced up. I thought I saw a shape leaning over the railing, but the lights were too dim to be sure. I felt like my heart was in my throat. I found Carmen in the laundry room on the first floor. I told her I'd seen enough. I was trembling, and I could barely speak normally. She gave me a sympathetic nod. She said, "They don't usually come this close. You must have sparked their curiosity." I asked her if the manager knew about this. She just laughed and said, "He's heard the stories, but he doesn't believe. He thinks it's just our imaginations." I left early that night. The next day I came back for my shift with more determination. I didn't want to quit. I needed the money, and I felt like I'd be letting my nerves get the best of me if I just walked away. But every night was the same. Strange footsteps on the second floor, occasional glimpses of something tall moving in the corners of my vision, and that unbearable feeling of being watched near the windows and in the darkest parts of the corridor. I never saw a face, never heard words or voices. All I felt was the pressure and the presence. I started cleaning faster, trying to get done before midnight. That helped a bit. I noticed that most activities seemed to happen around 12:30 or 1 a.m. If I could get upstairs, do a quick job, and get out, I'd avoid most of it. But some nights I'd hear those footsteps even earlier. Other nights I'd catch a glimpse of a shadow by the window, or I'd see a door handle move on its own. Over time, I learned little tricks. I'd keep multiple lights on, and I'd make noise while I worked so I couldn't hear every little sound. I started bringing a portable radio, which drowned out the footsteps. But every now and then, I'd still get that cold wave of dread washing over me. I'd stop and realize the hallway was too quiet, or I'd feel someone standing behind me when I was near a locked door. No matter how much I tried to brush it off, I couldn't deny something strange was happening. I never found a logical explanation for any of it. No one showed up in the security cameras, at least none that we could see. The manager once checked the feeds after I reported the footsteps, but he said the tapes showed nothing, just me walking around with my flashlight. Even Carmen insisted that the cameras never caught the tall shadows. She said they were too clever, or that they existed in a space just out of reach of normal sight. I didn't argue. I just kept my head down and did my job. After a while, I stopped asking questions. I made peace with the fact that I'd never be able to explain it. I told myself I'd keep coming back as long as I could handle it. If it got worse, I'd quit. But the job paid well and I had bills to cover. So I stayed. Every night I'd feel that tension in my stomach as I climbed the staircase to the second floor. I'd see movement in the corners and hear soft footsteps behind me. My heart would race and I'd grip my mop handle tight, but I'd keep going. I can't say I've gotten used to it, but I've learned to manage it. I learned which parts of the hallway are the creepiest. I learned that turning on the lights early helps a bit. I also learned that if I speak aloud, sometimes it stays quieter. I say things like, "I'm just here to clean," or "No trouble from me." It sounds stupid, but it helps me feel less scared. The older cleaning lady still talks about them. She says they've been around for decades, maybe since the house was built. She thinks they're tied to the land or the lake somehow. I don't really care about the details anymore. I only care about getting through my shift without losing my nerve. Every now and then I dream about those corridors. In my dreams, the tall shadows stand in doorways and watch me. I wake up with a pounding heart, but I remind myself it's just my job. So every night I'm back here, pushing the cart around, listening to faint echoes of footsteps on old wooden floors. And every night, I feel the same pressure and the same cold presence. I don't know what they are, or why they're here, but I keep going. It's my job. And for now, that's enough. I heard about weird things happening in quiet neighborhoods, but I never expected to experience it firsthand. I was at my brother's place for a week, keeping an eye on his house while he was out of town. Nothing about the area seemed strange at first. The street was empty most of the day, and at night I heard the occasional car or a distant bark. I liked the silence. It made me feel safe. That changed on my third night. I arrived on a Monday afternoon. The sun was still high, and the inside of my brother's house felt warm and calm. I brought a small suitcase with enough clothes for 7 days. The house was a simple one-story place with 2 bedrooms, a living room, a small kitchen, and a garage that opened to a narrow driveway. There was a decent yard out front, though the grass needed a trim. My brother asked me to water a few plants in the back and pick up the mail. Easy stuff. On my first night, I ate a quick dinner, washed the dishes, and turned on the TV. The living room was cozy, and I recognized some of the furniture from our childhood home. My brother liked to keep familiar things around. As night fell, I double-checked the front door and windows. Everything was locked. I felt confident, so I settled on the couch, scrolled through channels, and ended up watching old reruns. Around 10 p.m., I went to bed in the smaller bedroom. The night was quiet. I slept like a rock. On the second day, I woke up late, took a shower, and wandered around the house. I watered the plants in the backyard, grabbed the mail from the box, and cleaned a few dishes from the night before. In the afternoon, I got bored and drove out for coffee. I returned around dusk, noticing how still the street was at that hour. No people walking their dogs, no kids playing, just a single porch light across the road. I stepped inside, locked the door, and started feeling that odd hush that sometimes creeps in when you realize you're alone. I brushed it off. The second night passed without incident, but I did find it harder to fall asleep. I stared at the ceiling for a while, thinking about my routine. Eventually, I dozed off. On the third day, I didn't do much. I heated leftovers, watched a few shows, and read some articles online. By evening, I realized I hadn't been outside since morning. I decided to check the front yard and make sure the mailbox was empty. That's when I first noticed something off. While I stood by the mailbox, I glanced at the living room window. There was a figure, maybe a man, just standing there on the other side of the glass. It caught me off guard. I felt my stomach tense up. I froze and stared back at this shape. The window was dark. The inside lights were off. I couldn't make out features, just a silhouette. The figure's head was turned toward me, but I couldn't see a face. I felt a rush of panic. My heart was thumping hard in my chest. For a second, I thought, maybe it's a reflection, maybe it's me, or maybe it's just a shadow. But I was outside, and this shape was on the inside. I was sure it wasn't me. I took one step closer, and the silhouette turned slightly, like it was watching me approach. My breathing got shallow. I sprinted to the front door, fumbled with my keys, and burst inside. The living room was dark. I flipped the light switch on. Nobody was there. I checked behind the couch, around the corners, even under the table. Nothing. My skin was crawling, and I felt hot even though the air was cool. I locked the door again, checked the windows, and peered outside. The yard was empty. The street was empty. I turned off the light and tried to see if anyone was there. No shape, no person. My mind told me I was just being paranoid, but I couldn't ignore the feeling that I'd seen someone. I went to bed that night with a knot in my stomach. I left the hallway light on, just in case. The fourth night was when everything escalated. Early in the evening, around 7 p.m., I sat in the living room with the lights off, scrolling through my phone. I saw movement near the window. It was sudden, like a quick shift in the glass. I looked up and saw the same silhouette standing there again. This time I dropped my phone. The screen clattered on the coffee table and I jumped to my feet. My arms felt weak and my mouth went dry. The silhouette was still for a moment, then seemed to lean back as if it was stepping away from the window. I rushed to turn the lamp on. As soon as the light filled the room, the silhouette vanished. I ran over to the window, pulled the curtains aside, and looked outside. No one was there. I was breathing fast. My heart was pounding in my ears. I checked the front door, made sure it was locked, then hurried to the back door in the kitchen. It was secure. All the windows in the bedrooms were locked. I circled the house, checking every possible entrance. Everything was intact. Still, I felt watched. I texted my brother, told him something weird was going on. He wrote back that nobody in the neighborhood had reported anything unusual. He told me to keep the doors locked, maybe call the cops if I saw anything else. I decided to wait before calling them, partly because I felt embarrassed. I didn't have proof, just a silhouette that vanished every time I turned a light on. Later that night, I lay awake in bed with all the doors locked. The house was dark except for a small nightlight in the hallway. I stared at the ceiling again, listening for any sign of movement. Around 2 a.m., I finally drifted off. Maybe an hour or two passed when I suddenly woke up. My eyes snapped open and I didn't understand why at first. The bedroom was silent. Then I heard a faint tapping sound coming from the living room. I got out of bed, my legs shaky. I opened the door slowly, stepped into the hallway and listened. The tapping was quiet, like someone gently knocking on glass. My hands trembled. My skin felt cold. The tapping was coming from the living room window. I crept closer, every step making my heart pound harder. I peeked around the corner. At first, I didn't see anything. The nightlight in the hallway cast a weak glow, but it didn't reach the living room. My eyes were adjusting to the darkness. Then I saw it. The silhouette was pressed right up against the window. I could make out a faint shape of shoulders, a dark outline of a head, and a hand or something pressed to the glass. I froze. My mouth hung open, but no sound came out. I stood there for a moment, not sure what to do. The silhouette wasn't moving much, but the tapping continued, soft and deliberate. I wanted to turn on the lamp, but I also feared what would happen when the lights came on. Would it disappear? Would it break the window? My thoughts raced. I felt sweat on my forehead, my stomach twisted. Finally, I reached for the nearest switch, flicked it on, and the living room flooded with light. Instantly, the tapping stopped. I lurched forward to see if the figure was still there. The window was empty. All I saw was my reflection in the glass. My hands were shaking so much I had to hold them together. I hurried to the window, unlocked it, and slid it open a crack. I stuck my head out and looked around. The front yard was quiet and dark. The street was still. My heart was still racing, and I felt a little lightheaded. I slammed the window shut and locked it. I grabbed my phone and paced around the living room. I decided to call the police and report a trespasser. They said they'd send a patrol car. I sat on the couch waiting, my leg bouncing up and down with nervous energy. When the officer arrived, I explained the situation. He walked around the outside of the house, shining his flashlight near the windows. He looked for footprints or signs of tampering. He found nothing. No footprints, no marks on the windows. The grass was slightly wet from the evening dew, but I didn't see any clear footprints either. The officer told me to stay alert and call again if I saw anything else. He left, and I felt deflated. It was almost 4 a.m. by that point, and I didn't see any point in going back to bed. I made coffee and sat in the kitchen until sunrise. By the 5th day, my nerves were shot. I was jumpy at every sound. Even the refrigerator hum made me twitch. I spent most of the day looking out the windows. The neighborhood looked normal. A neighbor walked his dog once in the afternoon, but I didn't see any suspicious figures. As night approached, I considered finding a motel, but I felt guilty leaving my brother's place when he was counting on me to watch it. I decided to stick it out. That evening, I kept all the lights on. I turned on the living room, hallway, and kitchen lights. The place was bright, and I hoped that would keep whoever was outside away. I sat on the couch, the remote in hand, but I couldn't focus on the TV. My eyes kept darting to the windows. Hours passed without incident. Around midnight, I allowed myself to relax a bit. I turned off most of the lights and left only the lamp in the living room on. Then I went to bed. At around 3 a.m., I woke up to a noise. It wasn't tapping this time. It was more like scratching, but very faint. My stomach sank. My skin tingled with that rush of adrenaline. I got up and grabbed the first item I could find that resembled a weapon, a heavy flashlight from the nightstand. I crept through the hallway. The scratch sounded like it was coming from the kitchen window. I approached it, my heart feeling like it was in my throat. The kitchen was dark except for a thin strip of moonlight filtering through the window over the sink. As I got closer, I saw the silhouette again pressed against that window. I froze in place. My legs tensed, ready to run or fight if needed. The shape had its hands against the glass. I couldn't see a face, but I sensed it was looking straight at me. I swallowed hard. My scalp prickled with fear. I felt sweat trailing down my temple. Then the silhouette began to move slowly, sliding along the window to the side door. I heard the doorknob jiggle. My heart surged, and I gripped the flashlight tighter. I was about to yell something, but my voice caught in my throat. My mind was screaming, "Get out of there!" But I couldn't move. My feet were locked to the floor. The doorknob kept rattling. It wasn't loud, but it was persistent. Then it stopped. I didn't hear anything for a few seconds. I forced myself to take a step back. Suddenly, there was a hard thud against the door, like a shoulder bump. I jumped. My chest felt hollow. I had trouble breathing. Before I could do anything else, the thud stopped. I reached for the light switch in the kitchen and flicked it on. Bright light poured into the room. I yanked the curtain aside, but the silhouette was gone again. That was it for me. I called the police a second time and told them what happened. It was almost 4 in the morning when the patrol car pulled up. 2 officers checked the perimeter again, but found nothing. No footprints. No damage to the door. They asked if I'd been drinking or taking any medication. I told them no. I didn't appreciate the question, but I knew they had to ask. They stayed for about 10 minutes and then left, reminding me to call if I saw anything else. For the next 2 nights, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I expected to hear scratching or tapping. I kept all the lights on at night. The silhouette didn't appear on those nights, or if it did, I never caught a glimpse. My nerves were shot and I felt exhausted. I kept thinking 3 more days, 2 more days, counting down until my brother got home. He returned on a Sunday morning. I told him everything. We walked around the house looking for any clue. We checked the locks, the doors, the windows. Everything looked normal. No scratches on the glass, no scuff marks. He believed I saw something, but he had no explanation either. We sat in the living room for a while, and he said maybe it was some local prowler messing around. Or maybe I caught the same weird reflection a few times. I know what I saw, though. After that week, I went back to my own place. My brother never reported anything similar, but I still remember the look of that dark figure at the window. I remember how my chest tightened and my hands shook every time I turned on a light, hoping it would vanish and afraid it wouldn't. Maybe it was a stranger, maybe it was something else, but I can't forget how it felt to see it staring in at me. The neighborhood is supposed to be peaceful, and it probably is. But for those nights, it felt like a place where anything could happen. I still triple-check my doors and windows before I go to bed now. I leave a lamp on sometimes, even though it's been months. I haven't seen that silhouette again, but part of me can't shake the sensation of waking up in the dark, hearing that faint tapping on glass and knowing something is only a few feet away, separated by a thin pane, watching in silence. It's not an experience I'll ever forget. And honestly, I'm not sure I want to be left alone in that house again.